You spent your last $8 on a man you didn't even know." Her neighbor's voice cracked with something between disbelief and contempt. "Sienna, that money was for Maya's breakfast." "I know what it was for," Sienna said quietly. "Then why?" "Because he was dying on the ground and nobody stopped. Not one person." She looked up and her eyes weren't apologetic. They were steady. "I couldn't walk past that. I don't know how to walk past that." What happened next would change everything she thought she understood about kindness, about danger, and about what it means to be truly seen. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. The gas station on Mercer Street was the kind of place that existed in the space between things. Between the decent neighborhood 2 blocks north and the one people didn't talk about 2 blocks south. Between the bright fluorescent wash of the canopy lights and the dark beyond the lot's edge, where the street lamps had been burned out for 3 months and nobody had come to fix them. It was the kind of place you move through fast, head down, keys in hand, because lingering there felt like an invitation to something you didn't want. Sienna Clark had been moving through fast her entire adult life. She was 31 years old and she had been moving fast since she was 19, when the world handed her a situation she hadn't asked for and no map to navigate it. She had Maya at 19, not a tragedy she would tell anyone who dared imply otherwise, but a recalibration. A sudden, terrifying, clarifying recalibration of every priority she would ever have for the rest of her life. Maya was 12 now, and she was the reason Sienna was on Mercer Street at 11:40 at night, with a purse containing exactly $8.14, 2 bus transfer tickets, and a cell phone with a cracked screen she'd been meaning to fix since January. The morning shift at Harlan's Diner started at 5:30. The cleaning job at the Westfield Medical Pavilion ended at 11:15. In between, there were exactly 4 hours and 15 minutes in which Sienna Clark was theoretically supposed to sleep, and she had been theoretically supposed to do this for 9 months without once achieving it in any meaningful way. Sleep had become something that happened to her in fragments: 20 minutes on the bus, 40 minutes before Maya's alarm went off for school, an hour on Sunday mornings, when Mrs. Delgado from downstairs would come up and sit with Maya so Sienna could close her eyes. She was tired in a way that had stopped being describable about 6 months ago. But she was moving. She was always moving. The $8 was the problem. Or rather, the $8 was the sum total of what stood between Maya's breakfast tomorrow and nothing. Sienna had miscalculated this week, a mistake she almost never made because she couldn't afford to make it. But the bus fare had gone up on Monday, and she hadn't known until she was already standing at the stop and the extra $1.50 had come out of somewhere, and the somewhere turned out to be her food buffer. She'd been planning to stop at the 24-hour corner store on Mercer, the one that still sold individual eggs and single-serving oatmeal packets at prices that were technically robbery, but were convenient enough to justify at midnight, and she was going to buy Maya's breakfast and her own coffee for tomorrow morning, and she'd worked out that she could do it for $7 and change if she didn't get the orange juice. She was walking through the gas station lot because it was a shortcut, 45 seconds off the walk. When you were this tired, 45 seconds was not nothing. That was when she saw him. He was on the ground beside a motorcycle that was leaning against the side wall of the station, away from the pumps where the light got weak and uncertain. At first, her brain registered him as a pile of something, a jacket, maybe thrown over a bag. Her brain wanted him to be a pile of something because a pile of something was not her problem, and she needed to not have any more problems tonight. But then she heard the sound. It was a low-labored groan, not dramatic, not a shout for help, just a sound a body makes when it has stopped performing and started failing, and something in Sienna's chest pulled hard toward it before her conscious mind had any say in the matter. She stopped walking. He was a big man, somewhere around 50, she guessed, though it was hard to tell from where she was standing. Heavy through the shoulders, which made it stranger that he looked so reduced down there on the ground, so diminished. He was wearing a black leather vest over a dark t-shirt, and even in the poor light, she could see the patches on the back white background, red lettering, an image she didn't need to read clearly to recognize. His gray hair was slicked back from his face, and his beard was neatly trimmed even now, which struck her for some reason as deeply human, the fact that someone had taken care with their appearance and then ended up like this. His arms were heavily tattooed. His hands were clutching at his chest. Hey, Sienna said, and she was surprised by how firm her own voice came out. Hey, can you hear me? The groans shifted. His eyes opened, dark eyes she saw scanning upward until they found her face. His lips moved. What's wrong? She said. What's happening? Heart, he managed. The word came out shredded. Your heart. She was already moving toward him, already crouching down, her bag dropping from her shoulder. Okay. Okay, are you on any medications? Do you have anything on you? His hand moved weakly toward his vest pocket. She reached in without asking permission and found a prescription bottle. She couldn't read the label in the light, but she could feel the pills inside. Is this for your heart? He managed something that might have been a nod. She didn't have water. She looked around. The gas station attendant was visible through the window, a young man, teenager probably, who was staring at his phone and had not looked up. I need to get you water, she said. She put her hand on his arm just briefly, just enough to mean something. Stay awake, I'm coming back. Stay awake. She crossed to the pump nearest the door, and there was a plastic cup someone had left on top of it, still holding a few fingers of flat soda. She grabbed it, dumped it, went inside. I need water, she said to the attendant, loud enough that he startled and looked up. Bottle of water, fast. There's a man outside having a cardiac event. The attendant blinked at her. A what? Heart attack. She was already at the refrigerator case. She grabbed the water and a small bottle of aspirin. She knew about aspirin, she had read. Something aspirin was what you gave, and she brought them to the counter, and the total came to $6.72. And she put her $8 on the counter without thinking about it, without doing the math, without asking herself whether this was the right decision. The right decision registered somewhere in her body before her brain caught up. She just did it. She was already moving back outside before the change hit her palm. He was still conscious, barely, but still there. Okay, she said, crouching beside him again, her voice steady and low, the way she talked to Maya when Maya was scared and Sienna needed her to stay calm. I've got water and aspirin. Aspirin's good for heart attacks. Okay, I need you to chew one. Can you do that for me? She helped him get the tablet between his lips. She helped him drink. His hands were shaking badly, and she cupped her hands around his to steady the water bottle. And she did not think about the money she'd just spent or the breakfast she'd just not bought. She thought about keeping him conscious. She thought about the sound his breathing was making. She called 911. I'm at the Mercer Street gas station, the one at the corner of Mercer and Hallowell. I have a man here, 50s. I think he's having a cardiac episode. He's conscious, but barely. Please come fast. The dispatcher asked her standard questions, and she answered them all, her hand still resting on the man's arm, her voice not wavering. She had not known until that moment how good she was at staying calm in crises. It was probably the exhaustion, she thought, when you were running on fumes. There simply wasn't the energy left for panic. While she waited for the ambulance, while she kept talking to him in that low, steady voice, she became aware of something. The gas station was not empty. There were 2 other cars at the pumps. There was a man in a truck on the far side of the lot who had been there when she walked in. There was the attendant inside who was now watching through the window. Not one of them had come over. Not one of them had stopped. She absorbed this fact quietly without making much of it, the way she absorbed a lot of facts about the world. You learned it when you were Sienna's age and had lived Sienna's life that most people were not bad. They were afraid. They were tired. They told themselves someone else would handle it. They found reasons why stepping forward wasn't their responsibility. And those reasons were usually convincing because the mind was very good at constructing convincing reasons when it wanted to protect itself. She had almost done the same thing. She had almost kept walking. She looked down at the man and watched his breathing slow and steady, slightly, the aspirin doing something, the water helping. His eyes were still open. He was watching her face. Help's coming, she told him. You're gonna be okay. She didn't know if that was true, but she said it the way you say things when the saying itself has to carry weight, when the words are a form of something you can actually give a person. He said something. She had to lean in close to hear it. Alone, he said. You're not alone, she said immediately. I'm right here. No, he exhaled slow and ragged. I was alone for a long time. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just kept her hand on his arm and didn't say anything at all, and somehow that seemed to be the right answer. The ambulance took 11 minutes. 11 minutes that she sat on the concrete of a gas station lot in the middle of the night with a stranger who might be dying, and the world went on around her as if nothing unusual was happening. The truck on the far side of the lot pulled away while she was still on the phone with the dispatcher. The attendant went back to his phone. A woman came to the pump closest to them, looked over and looked away quickly, and paid at the pump without going inside. 11 minutes, and then the lights were there and the paramedics were there and they were asking her questions and she was answering them. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, the man's hand found hers and gripped it harder than she'd expected for a man who just looked about to lose consciousness. And then he was on the gurney and they were asking her to step back. She stepped back. She stood there in the lot with $1.42 in her hand, the change from the $8, and she watched the ambulance pull away with its lights going. And she was aware in a distant way that she had no idea who that man was, had never asked his name, didn't know if he would survive the night, and had just spent the money that was supposed to feed her daughter breakfast tomorrow. She was also aware in that same distant way that she didn't regret it. She was not sure what that said about her. She was not sure what it said about the world that nobody else had stopped. She was not sure about a lot of things standing there in the fluorescent half-light of a gas station at midnight with empty hands and a long walk still ahead of her. What she was sure about was simple. She had not walked past. That was the whole of it. Whatever happened next, she had not walked past. She picked up her brain and started walking home. Maya was asleep when Sienna got in the way she almost always was, because Maya was a good kid in all the ways that counted, and one of those ways was understanding, without being told that her mother needed her to be asleep when she got home. The apartment was small. 2 bedrooms, technically, though the second bedroom was barely big enough for Maya's twin bed, her dresser, and the enormous amount of personality a 12-year-old managed to pack into 300 square feet. Sienna had made it cozy. She'd hung a string of paper stars Maya had made in 2nd grade along the window. She'd painted the kitchen a yellow that was probably too ambitious for the size of the room, but made the whole place feel less like the reality of what it was. She stood in the doorway of Maya's room for a moment in the dark. Maya was on her side, one arm flung over the edge of the mattress, her mouth slightly open. She'd fallen asleep with her hair still in its daytime braids, and the braids had gotten complicated against the pillow in a way that was going to be a project in the morning. Sienna thought about breakfast. She had $1.42 in a corner store 3 blocks away that sold individual eggs for 75 cents each. She could get 1 egg. She did the math automatically the way she always did the constant background arithmetic of her life. 1 egg wouldn't be enough. She had half a box of generic cornflakes in the cabinet, and there was milk she'd bought a half-gallon on Monday, and there was still enough left for a bowl. It wasn't great, but it was breakfast. Maya wouldn't complain. Maya never complained about food, which was something Sienna was both grateful for and quietly heartbroken about, because she knew exactly why Maya didn't complain. She closed the door softly and went to the kitchen and sat down at the table. And she didn't cry. She had tried crying about this about 2 years ago, and it hadn't improved anything, so she'd mostly stopped. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table at midnight with her hands folded on the scratched formica surface, and she thought about the man on the ground, about the sound his breathing had made, about the way his hand had gripped hers. She thought, I would do it again. And then she got up and set Maya's bowl out on the counter so she wouldn't forget, and she went to bed. She told no one. This was not a deliberate decision exactly. She didn't think to herself, I will keep this secret. It was more that there was no natural moment to say it. Maya left for school at 7:15, and the conversation was about whether it was going to rain and whether Maya needed her good jacket or her rain jacket, and then Sienna was on the bus to Harlan's Diner, and the morning rush swallowed her whole, and there was no space in the physics of the day for a story about midnight and a gas station and $8. It came out at 3 in the afternoon. She had come back from her 6-hour morning shift with enough time to clean the apartment before her evening shift started, and she was in the hallway when Deb Kowalski from the apartment next door came out with her recycling and made that particular face the face she made when she'd been waiting for Sienna specifically. I heard something, Deb said. Sienna kept moving toward the door. I'm kind of in a hurry, Deb. About you. Deb shifted the recycling to one arm. About last night. Sienna stopped. Deb Kowalski was not a bad person. She was in her mid-50s, lived alone since her divorce 3 years ago, had opinions about everything from the weather to local politics to the correct way to fold laundry. She was also the primary information distribution system for their building, which meant that anything she knew, everyone knew, and the timeline between her learning it and telling it was approximately 6 minutes. "What did you hear?" Sienna said. "That you helped one of those Hells Angels people last night." Deb's voice had that specific, careful quality that people use when they want to convey serious concern while technically doing it in a neighborly way. "Is that true?" "True. I helped a man who was having a medical emergency," Sienna said. "A Hells Angel. I don't know what he was. He was a man having a cardiac event, and I called an ambulance." Deb looked at her for a long moment. "Sienna, those are not people you want to be involved with." "I wasn't getting involved. I was calling 911. "You spent money on him?" Deb's voice shifted, and now the concern was real, which was somehow worse than the careful kind. "Margaret at the gas station told her cousin, who told, anyway, everyone knows, you bought him medicine with your own money." Sienna felt something tighten in her chest. Not shame, she identified it carefully because she'd learned to identify her emotions with precision, the way you learn to identify exactly which bill was overdue when you couldn't pay all of them at once. Not shame, something more like exposure. The particular discomfort of being seen doing something private. "It was $8, she said. "It was your last $8 is what I heard." "People should mind their own business," Sienna said, and she meant it, but she also heard how defensive it sounded and hated that. "Maybe so." Deb set down her recycling. "But Sienna, those people, they run drugs, they're criminals. You don't know what you got yourself into by helping one of them." "I got myself into calling an ambulance for a man who was dying on the ground." Sienna picked up her key because the conversation was going nowhere she wanted to go. "I'd do it again. You have Maya to think about." That landed, that was designed to land, and it did right in the center of her chest where everything about Maya lived. "I am thinking about Maya," Sienna said quietly. "Every minute of every day, I'm thinking about Maya. And what I want her to know is that when someone is dying in front of you, you don't walk past. That's what I want her to know." She went inside and closed the door. She stood in her kitchen with her back against the door, and she breathed slowly, and she told herself it didn't matter what Deb said, what anyone said, because she knew what she'd done, and she knew why she'd done it, and she had made her peace with the cost of it. She believed this. She was also, if she was being honest with herself, afraid. Not of Hell's Angels specifically. She didn't have the luxury of a sophisticated fear hierarchy. She was afraid the way she was always afraid of something going wrong that she hadn't anticipated, of a consequence she hadn't accounted for, of the world finding one more way to make her life harder than it already was. She had done a kind thing, and it had already spread through the building like weather, already acquired a layer of judgment she hadn't asked for, and she didn't know where it would go from here. She made herself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, and she was not going to think about it anymore. But she did think about it. She thought about it the entire rest of the afternoon. Maya came home at 3:45. She was 12, and she was at the age where she came through the door, already talking the way 12-year-olds do, as if the whole day had been building up behind a dam somewhere, and home was where it finally got to break through. She came in talking about a project on ecosystems and about a girl in her class named Priya, who had said something that was either really funny or kind of mean. Maya couldn't decide which, and about whether it was possible for a person to be allergic to homework as a medical condition. And Sienna listened to all of it at the kitchen counter while she made the rice and beans that were going to be dinner. She did not tell Maya about the night before. At 12, Maya knew more about their financial situation than Sienna would have chosen. Kids always knew more than you wanted them to. And Maya was perceptive in that particular way of children who learned early that the adult world was not as stable as advertised. She understood at some level that money was careful and tight and deliberate. She had never once asked for something unreasonable, which was its own kind of burden to carry. Sienna was not going to tell her that breakfast would be cornflakes because Sienna had spent their food money on a stranger. Or rather, she would tell her eventually when she could frame it right, when the story had a shape Maya could learn something from. But not tonight. Tonight was rice and beans and the ecosystem project, and the question of whether Priya was funny or mean. "Mom," Maya said somewhere between the second and third spoonful of rice. Mrs. Kowalski told me something weird." Sienna set down her fork very carefully. "She said you helped a Hell's Angel last night. Is that true?" Sienna looked at her daughter. Maya was watching her with those precise brown eyes that had always seen too much, that had been seeing too much since she was old enough to understand what she was looking at. I helped a man who was sick, Sienna said. A biker. A person who happened to be wearing a biker vest. She paused. He was on the ground. He was having chest pains. I bought him some aspirin and water and called 911. Maya processed this for a moment. Mrs. Kowalski said you spent your last money. Mrs. Kowalski needs a hobby. Mom, Sienna exhaled. Yes, I did spend our grocery money. I'm sorry about that. Breakfast tomorrow is going to be cornflakes. She looked at Maya steadily. But he was a person who needed help, and I had what he needed, and I wasn't going to walk past. Maya looked at her mother for a long, serious moment. She had the look she sometimes got when she was weighing something not performing, thought actually doing it, which was one of about 1,000 things Sienna loved ferociously about this particular human she had raised. Was he okay? Maya said. I don't know. I hope so. Did he say thank you? Not exactly. He wasn't in great shape for talking. She thought of his hand on hers. He told me he'd been alone for a long time. Maya was quiet for a moment. That's sad, she said. Yeah, Sienna said. It is. They ate the rest of the rice and beans without talking, and it was the comfortable kind of quiet, not the hard kind. And when Maya went to do her homework, Sienna stood at the window for a moment and thought about the man on the ground and wondered if he was alive. She still didn't know his name. She should probably have asked his name. The next morning was cornflakes as promised. Maya ate them without complaint and carried her backpack to the door and was almost out when she turned back. Mom, she said. Yeah, I think you did the right thing. Sienna looked at her. Just so you know, Maya said, and she went to school. Sienna stood in the kitchen holding an empty cereal bowl, and she felt something crack open very briefly in her chest, that specific crack of being loved by a person you made with your own body, and then she closed it back up because she had to catch the bus. She was halfway through the morning rush at Harlan's. She was on her second table rotation, had 4 tickets up and 2 coffees going cold because table 7 kept waiting until she walked away and then flagging her back when her phone buzzed. She didn't look at it. You didn't look at your phone during a rush at Harlan's. You did not exist as a person with a phone during a rush at Harlan's. You were a function. She looked at it during her 11 o'clock break, standing in the narrow back corridor between the kitchen and the storage closet with a cup of coffee she'd poured for herself and a granola bar she'd bought from the box they kept near the register. Unknown number. Text message. My name is Cole. I ride with the club that Hawk belongs to. I know you're the one who helped him last night. We need to talk. This is not a threat. Please call me back. Sienna read it twice. She looked up at the wall of the corridor. The wall had a poster on it. Fire safety procedures mounted in a plastic frame, and she read the fire safety procedures twice without taking them in at all. Hawk, that was his name. The man on the ground had a name and it was Hawk, and he had people who called him that, and those people had found her phone number, and she did not know how they had found her phone number. That last part was the part she kept returning to. She hadn't given her name at the gas station. She hadn't given it to the paramedics. She'd answered their questions, but they hadn't asked for identification, and she hadn't offered any. She was not on any camera she knew of. She'd used cash. She'd used cash for the aspirin and water, she realized. Cash. And the cashier had barely looked at her. And yet here was a text on her phone from a person named Cole who knew she was the one who helped and who had her number. She didn't call back. She went back to her tables, but the text was there like a stone in her shoe, present in every step of the next 2 hours. It was there when she cleared table 7 and smiled at the couple there and refilled their coffee. It was there when she counted her tips at the end of shift, $46, which was a decent morning which she needed. It was there on the bus going home, and there when she was changing her shoes, and there when she stood in the kitchen making the mental arithmetic of this week's budget the way she did every day, the quiet private math of survival. She thought about what Deb Kowalski had said, about what she'd heard about criminal organizations about Maya. She thought about what Maya had said. I think you did the right thing. She sat down at the kitchen table. She called Cole back. He picked up on the second ring. His voice was younger than she'd expected, maybe late 20s, And there was something careful in it, something that was trying to be non-threatening and not entirely succeeding because the effort itself was a little too visible. "Miss Clark," he said. "How do you have my number?" Sienna said. She didn't say hello. She asked the question that had been in her shoe for 2 hours. A pause. There was a security camera at the station, not the gas station across the street. We have people who know how to find things when they need to. That doesn't entirely make me feel better. "No," Cole said. I said, "I get that. I'm sorry. I don't know how else to say this except directly Hawk is alive. He had a heart attack, and they got him in time, and he's going to recover. And what you did buying that aspirin, staying with him, calling 911, the doctors said it made a real difference. He could have been down much longer. He could have..." He stopped. "He's alive because you didn't walk past him." Sienna was quiet. "He wants to thank you," Cole said. "We all want to thank you. We'd like you to come meet us. Neutral ground, a diner, a coffee shop, wherever you're comfortable. Just to say thank you properly." "I don't need to be thanked," Sienna said. "I know you don't need it," Cole said, "but Hawk does. He needs to give it." Another pause. "He's not great with things being unfinished. It's just how he is." Sienna thought about the hand gripping hers, about the word alone coming out of him like it cost something to say. "Where," she said. The moment she said it, she felt the shift, that specific quality of a decision that has already moved you forward, whether you're ready for it or not. She had felt it before, standing at the gas station counter with $8 and a bottle of aspirin and a man dying outside on the ground. She had felt it at 19, holding a positive test and understanding that her life had just changed irrevocably. She recognized the feeling by now. She knew what it meant. It meant something was ending and something else was starting, and the two things were happening in the same moment, and there was nothing to do but keep moving forward because that was what she did. She had always kept moving forward. She wrote down the address Cole gave her, folded the paper, and put it in her pocket. She sat at the kitchen table in the apartment she had made as warm as she could on the income she had, and she looked at the yellow kitchen walls and the string of paper stars visible through the doorway in the single-dollar bill. And change that was what remained of her week's spending money. And she thought about what it meant to have done a thing you couldn't take back and whether you'd want to. She didn't want to. She still didn't regret it, but she was afraid. She was afraid in the specific way of a woman who has learned that the world does not protect people like her from the consequences of their own goodness, that compassion does not come with insurance, that doing the right thing and being protected from the fallout of doing the right thing are two entirely separate transactions, and you don't always get both. She had done the right thing. What came next, she couldn't control. She had never been able to control what came next. She had only ever been able to control what she did when it got there. She folded her hands on the table. She breathed. She thought about Maya saying, "I think you did the right thing," and the way her voice had been so steady when she said it so clear, like she'd thought about it and arrived somewhere solid. That was 12 years of watching her mother make decisions, Sienna thought. That certainty in her voice was 12 years of watching someone who didn't walk past. She was not going to start now. She looked at the address on the paper. Tomorrow she would meet them. Whatever that meant, whatever that cost, whatever the world decided to do with a woman who had spent her last $8 on a stranger's life, she would meet them. And she would find out who Hawk really was. The diner Cole had suggested was called Patty's, and it was the kind of place that had been on the same corner since 1987 and intended to stay there until the building fell down around it. Sienna had passed it 100 times. She had never been inside because it was 3 blocks off her regular route, and 3 blocks when you were mapping every minute of your day was a real distance. She arrived 7 minutes early because she was always early to things that made her nervous. And being early gave her the illusion of control, which was sometimes the only kind available. Cole was already there. He was younger than his voice had suggested, maybe 25, maybe a little older, with the kind of face that was still figuring out what it was going to settle into. He had a leather vest on, but it was open over a plain gray t-shirt, and he was sitting in a booth by the window with his hands wrapped around a coffee cup. And he looked up when she came in with an expression that was somewhere between relief and carefully managed anxiety. "Ms. Clark," he said, and started to stand. "Sienna," she said, "sit down, please." He sat. She slid into the booth across from him, and the waitress came, and she ordered coffee because it was $2.35, and she had exactly $14 until Friday, and she had already done the math. Thank you for coming, Cole said. You said it wasn't a threat, Sienna said. I decided to believe you. He almost smiled. That's fair. How is he, Hawk? Cole's hands tightened slightly on his cup. He's stable. They're keeping him for another day or two. Doctors are saying if you hadn't given him the aspirin when you did, if you hadn't called when you did. He stopped and looked at his coffee. They said there was a window, and you kept him in it. Sienna nodded. She didn't say anything. He wants to see you, Cole said. You mentioned that. I know, he exhaled. I'm going to say something and I want you to hear it the way it's meant, which is respectful. Okay, not everybody would have stopped. Most people, when they see the vest, when they see the patches, they cross the street. They look the other way. They tell themselves it's not their problem. He looked up at her. You didn't do that. I saw a man on the ground, Sienna said. I know, that's exactly what I mean. The coffee came and she wrapped both hands around it, the way she did in the morning when the apartment was still cold out of habit, out of something that was almost comfort. Cole, she said, I need to ask you something and I need you to be straight with me. Okay. My neighbor told me I should be afraid. She told me I got myself involved in something I don't understand and that people like, she stopped, chose her words, that people in your organization are dangerous, that coming here is a mistake. Cole didn't look away. He didn't get defensive. He just looked at her steadily, the way people look when they've heard a version of this before and have decided the only honest response to it is honesty. Some of what your neighbor thinks is probably true, he said, and some of it is a story people tell because it's easier than knowing the real one. He paused. Hawk is not what people think he is. That's all I can tell you right now, because the rest of it is his to tell. What does he want from me? She said. Nothing, Cole said. Genuinely. He wants to thank you. He wants to look the person in the eye who sat with him on the ground when he was dying, and he wants to say thank you to her face. That's it. Sienna looked at him for a long moment. When she said, tomorrow, if you're willing, she thought of Maya at the breakfast table that morning, eating cornflakes and reading the back of the cereal box the way she always did, as if the nutrition facts were literature. She thought of the $1.42. She thought about what Deb Kowalski had said and what Maya had said and the difference between them. Okay, she said, tomorrow. She drove herself to the hospital the next morning. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She told Maya she had an errand before her shift, which was technically true in the way that the true things you don't fully explain are still technically true. Cole met her in the lobby. He walked her up and she noticed that people looked at him in the elevator, the way people looked at anyone in a leather vest with patches, and she watched their faces do that thing, the quick assessment, the recalibration, the decision to stare at the door instead. Cole didn't seem to notice, or had noticed so many times it had become part of the weather of his life. Hawk was in a private room at the end of a corridor. He looked different in a hospital bed than he had on the ground. Larger somehow and smaller at the same time, larger because he was clearly a physically substantial man, even diminished smaller because the machines and the gown and the overhead lights stripped away whatever it was that had made him in the dark of the gas station lot feel like something you needed to approach carefully. His gray hair was loose now, and his beard was the same neat trim she'd registered in the dark. His arms on top of the blanket were heavily tattooed from wrist to shoulder, and the tattoos were detailed enough that she caught herself looking at them before she remembered it was rude to stare. He was watching her when she looked up. You're smaller than I thought, he said. His voice was ragged still, but it had weight in it that the ground version hadn't. You were mostly unconscious, Sienna said. Your perception was off. Something moved in his face that might have been a smile. Sit down, he said. She sat in the chair by the bed. Cole stayed near the door, giving them space without leaving, which she appreciated more than she expected to. I've been trying to figure out how to say this since yesterday, Hawk said. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at her. I'm not good at it, asking for help, saying thank you, any of it. I've been running my own life since I was 17 years old, and somewhere in there, I convinced myself that needing anything from anybody was a kind of weakness. That sounds exhausting, Sienna said. He looked at her with an expression that was sharp for a man who'd had a heart attack 2 days ago. David, he said, you're very direct. I work doubles 6 days a week, Sienna said. I don't have time to be indirect. He was quiet for a moment. Then thank you for not walking past. You don't need to. I know I don't need to, I want to. His voice shifted, not harder exactly, but more deliberate, like he was picking up something he'd set down carefully. I was on the ground for Cole. How long before she got there? We don't know exactly, Cole said from the door. The camera catches her going in at 11:41. Looks like you were down before that. So I was down at least 10-15 minutes before you got there, Hawk said. The other people in the lot didn't stop, Sienna said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just the fact. No, Hawk said. They didn't. He looked at his hands on the blanket. I'm aware of what people see when they look at this vest. I've been aware of it for 30 years. Sometimes it's useful. Sometimes, he stopped. Sometimes you end up alone on a concrete lot at midnight, wondering if the thing you built to protect yourself has also built a wall you can't get people to cross. Sienna said nothing, but she heard it, really heard it, the specific loneliness in it, the kind that lives inside people who seem too large or too formidable or too other for ordinary compassion to find them. You crossed it, he said. I saw a person, Sienna said. That's all. He looked at her for a long moment. Cole told me about the money. Cole told me a lot of things, Sienna said and glanced at Cole, who had the grace to look slightly abashed. Your last $8, Hawk said. It's fine. It's not fine. It's fine, she said again firmly. I made a choice with my money. That's my business. You have a daughter, he said. She went very still. The stillness that wasn't peace, but its opposite. The stillness of a woman who has learned to be very careful when her daughter enters a conversation unexpectedly. How do you know that, she said. Hawk said. The camera across the street, Cole said from the door, and he sounded like he knew this was the part he'd have to answer for. Your address came up in the building directory. Your name's on the lease. There are photos. Stop, Sienna said. The word came out quiet and absolute, not angry, not frightened, just finished. You looked up my address, she said. Yes, Cole said. You looked up my name. You looked at photos of me, photos that included my daughter. Yes. And then you texted my personal phone number telling me it wasn't a threat. The room was very quiet. Cole had the decency to not try to defend it. Hawk had the decency to not look away from her face. You're right to be angry, Hawk said. I'm not angry, Sienna said. I'm deciding. She looked at him. I'm deciding whether to stand up and leave and consider this whole thing done. Because I helped you and I'm glad you're alive, but I am a single mother and I do not know you. And the fact that you can find my name and address and photographs of my child in the amount of time it took me to get from that gas station to my apartment is not information that makes me feel safe. No, Hawk said. It wouldn't. So tell me, she said, why I should stay in this chair. Hawk was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she heard one of the machines beep once the sound of the corridor outside someone laughing far away. Because I'm going to tell you something that almost nobody knows, he said, and because you deserve to know it, since you're the one who made sure I'd still be alive to tell it. She looked at him. She did not stand up. Talk, she said. What Hawk told her took almost 40 minutes. He told it the way men tell things they don't have practice telling in pieces, with silences between them, circling around the center of it before coming in. She didn't rush him. She sat in the chair by his hospital bed, and she drank the bad hospital coffee that Cole had brought her without asking. And she listened. He told her his name was Robert Hawkins, that everyone had called him Hawk since his early 20s, that he'd started writing when he was 19 and found the club when he was 23, and that for a long time that was his whole world, the road to brotherhood, the specific freedom of a life lived in motion, accountable to nothing and no one. Then he told her about Lily. His daughter had been born when he was 28. Her mother, a woman named Patricia, who he'd loved badly and too late, who deserved better than he'd known how to give, had left when Lily was 4. He hadn't been the father he should have been. He told this part without excuses, without self-pity, just the plain accounting of a man who understood his failures and had stopped trying to dress them up. Lily had grown up mostly without him, and then when she was 16, she'd gotten sick. He said the word leukemia in the flat, deliberate way of someone who has said it so many times it has lost its power to destroy him, but only barely. He had shown up. That was what he said. He had finally catastrophically late shown up. He'd been at the hospital for 8 months, and in those 8 months, he had seen things that had changed the geography of what he thought he was. He had seen families in the waiting room who couldn't afford parking. He had seen a mother eating crackers from a vending machine because she couldn't leave the floor to get real food. He had seen a man sleeping in a chair for 3 days because there was no one else to be there and no money for a hotel. He had seen in the brutal fluorescent clarity of a pediatric oncology ward exactly what it looked like when the world abandoned people. Lily had died at 17, 11 years ago now. He said this part the quietest. And then he had gone back to the road and ridden for a year without purpose. And one night he had pulled over at a rest stop and sat on his bike in the dark and asked himself what Lily would want the rest of his life to look like. He said the answer had been immediate and completely obvious, and it had felt like hearing her voice. He told Sienna about Lily's legacy. He told it carefully the way you tell something you've learned to be careful with. A network, that was the word he used, because charity sounded like something else, sounded like something with a website and a gala dinner, and Lily's legacy was neither. It was a network of people, many of them writers spread across 11 states, who quietly found families in crisis, families like the ones he'd seen in that hospital corridor, and who helped them. Not publicly, not with fanfare, with groceries left on doorsteps, with utilities paid anonymously, with rent covered for a month when the alternative was eviction, with medications purchased and medical bills reduced by people who knew how to navigate systems that were designed to be non-navigable. No press releases, no social media, no gala dinners. 11 years, thousands of families. Sienna sat with this for a moment. Nobody knows, she said. Very few people, Hawk said. The people inside it. Some of the families, though we prefer, they don't know where the help comes from. We don't do this for the recognition. Why, she said, because Lily didn't get to be recognized for what she was, he said. She was 17 years old, and she was the kindest person I ever met, and she died in a hospital bed, and the world didn't notice. This is what I can do. I can make sure the thing she made me understand doesn't die with her. Sienna put down the coffee cup. And you're telling me this because you spent your last $8 on a dying stranger, Hawk said. And I want you to know what that stranger actually is. She breathed. The room felt different than it had 10 minutes ago. Not larger, not smaller, different in the way rooms feel when the thing that just happened in them has shifted the air. Okay, she said. Thank you for telling me. That's all you've got, Cole said from the doorway. And he sounded genuinely startled. What did you want me to do? Sienna said. I don't know, Cole said. Most people, when they find out, I'm not most people, Sienna said, not unkindly. She looked at Hawk. I'm glad you're alive. I'm glad you're doing what you're doing, and I hope you get out of this hospital and keep doing it. She stood up. Sienna, Hawk said. She stopped. I want to do something, he said. For you. For your daughter. And I want you to let me. I don't need charity, she said. I know you don't. His voice was steady. But I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually think about it instead of saying no automatically. Can you do that? She looked at him for a long moment. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking. She picked up her bag and walked to the door, and Cole stepped aside to let her through, and she was in the corridor and moving before she let herself feel the weight of what had just happened in that room. It settled on her slowly, the way big things do, not all at once, but in increments, each one heavier than the last. She was in the elevator going down when her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Unknown number, different from Cole's. A text that said, my name is Darlene. I got your number from Hawk. I'm one of the women who helps run Lily's legacy. I know you just met him, and I know this is fast. But I need you to know something. What you did 2 nights ago, it wasn't just kindness. We were in the middle of coordinating something big, and Hawk was the only one who knew all the moving pieces. If he had died on that lot, 15 families were going to fall through the cracks. 15 families who'd been waiting months for help. You saved him. You saved them. I thought you should know that. Sienna stood in the elevator with the doors open on the lobby. She read the text 3 times. 15 families. She had spent $8, and 15 families she would never meet had kept their safety net intact. She walked out of the hospital into the daylight, and she stood on the sidewalk, and she did something she hadn't done since she was 19 years old and holding a positive test in a gas station bathroom, and understanding that her life had just changed completely. She cried. Not dramatically, not loudly, just stood there on the sidewalk with her bag on her shoulder and the sun on her face and tears running down her face because she was exhausted and she was proud and she was terrified. And she was something else she didn't have a word for yet, something that felt like meaning, like the particular sharp pain of having accidentally stumbled into a moment that was going to matter and knowing it while it was happening. She let it last about 30 seconds. Then she wiped her face and started walking. She had a shift in 2 hours. The neighborhood had opinions. This was not new. Her neighborhood had always had opinions, the way close quarters living produced opinion, the way heat produced humidity unavoidably and everywhere. But the opinions about Sienna Clarke and the Hells Angels man had reached a kind of critical mass by Thursday afternoon that she hadn't anticipated. It started with Deb Kowalski, which she had expected. But Deb had apparently told Margaret from the third floor, and Margaret had told her sister, and her sister knew the Pattersons from across the street, who ran the informal neighborhood association that had been operating out of the Pattersons' living room for 15 years and wielded approximately as much social authority as any government body within a 6-block radius. By Thursday afternoon, 3 separate people had found reasons to knock on Sienna's door. The first was Mr. Patterson himself, who arrived at 4:15 in a button-down shirt that suggested formality was intended, and who stood in her doorway with his hands in his pockets and said in his most carefully reasonable voice that the neighborhood had concerns. What kind of concerns? Sienna said. About association, he said. About what it means for the street, for property values, for property values, she repeated. People notice things, he said. When someone in the building is seen to be what Mr. Patterson friendly, and he said, and she could hear him picking the word carefully, with certain organizations. I called an ambulance for a man who was dying, Sienna said. I understand that. And that was, he chose his next word even more carefully, compassionate. But there's a difference between a compassionate act in the moment and ongoing. As he was a dying man and I called an ambulance, Sienna said again, the same words, the same tone, because she had found that repetition was its own kind of answer when the thing being said didn't require elaboration. I'll let you know if I do anything different. She closed the door. The second visitor was a woman named Rhonda from 2 buildings down who came with genuine worry rather than social management and who stood in the doorway and said quietly, Sienna, I'm not judging you, but these are not people you want attached to your name when Maya goes to register for high school next year. I'm just saying, people have long memories. This one was harder to dismiss because Rhonda was kind and Rhonda was right that the world was not fair in exactly this way, that a choice made with a clean conscience could still leave a stain on a reputation, especially for a woman who looked like Sienna and lived where Sienna lived and had the margin for error that Sienna had. Thank you, Rhonda, she said. I mean that. Just be careful, Rhonda said. The third visitor was a man named Terrence from across the alley who did not knock, but who intercepted her on her way to the bus the next morning with the specific energy of someone who had been waiting and had worked himself up for it. You know what they are, he said, falling into step beside her. Don't let anyone tell you different. Those vest people, they run drugs, they run money, they have people who do things. And you are walking around with your name in their phone. My name is in a lot of people's phones, Sienna said. She did not slow down. That's different, and you know it. Terrence. She stopped and turned to look at him as Andre Dumain. She kept her voice level because she needed to get to the bus and she needed to say this right. I hear you. I understand why you're worried, but I need you to hear something back. A man was dying. I helped him. That is the entire story. Whatever anyone has decided to add to it is their addition, not mine. And if they come back, Terrence said, if more of them start showing up around here, then I'll deal with that, Sienna said, the same way I deal with everything. She walked to the bus. She sat in the back because the back was where she could put her head against the window and close her eyes for 10 minutes, and she did that. And she tried to let the vibration of the bus do what it sometimes did, which was organize her thoughts through some mechanical process she couldn't explain, but had learned to rely on. What the bus gave her those 10 minutes was clarity about something she hadn't been willing to look at directly. She was afraid. Not of the bikers specifically, she was past that, or at least past the surface version of it. She was afraid of what the neighborhood was doing because the neighborhood was her safety net. These were the people who watched Maya walk home from school. These were the people who would knock on her door if something was wrong. These were the people who formed the invisible infrastructure of her life in the way that low-income communities always formed infrastructure for themselves, because no one else was going to do it. The informal network of watching out of knowing each other's business, not as gossip, but as care. And she had introduced something into that network that they didn't know how to categorize. She understood their fear. She had felt a version of it herself standing over Hawk in the lot. The instinctive self-protection, the voice that said, "Not your problem, keep moving." She had overruled that voice. She didn't regret it. But she understood now that overruling it had a cost she hadn't fully calculated. And the cost was this: she was standing slightly outside her community, now in that uncomfortable space between the choice you made and the place you started from, and she didn't yet know how to get to the other side. Her phone buzzed. "Cole, Hawk is being released tomorrow. He wants to know if you'd be willing to come by the clubhouse Saturday. Just you. Not a big thing. He wants to show you something." She stared at the message. The bus stopped at her corner. She got off. She stood on the sidewalk. She typed back, "What does he want to show me?" 3 minutes passed. She was almost at Harlan's when the reply came. "He says you'll understand when you see it, and that if you still want to leave after, he'll drive you home himself." She stood outside the diner with the morning rush already going through the windows, visible in the way that the world behind glass always looks slightly surreal, all that motion and heat and hunger contained. She thought about 15 families. She thought about Lily, who had been 17 years old and kind, and had died in a hospital bed while the world didn't notice. She thought about Maya, who had said, "I think you did the right thing," in a voice that had been clear and steady and had sounded for a moment frighteningly like an adult. She typed Saturday. What time? She put the phone in her apron pocket and she pushed through the door into the morning rush and the smell of coffee and bacon grease and something sweet from the bakery box someone had left on the counter, and she was already 3 steps into it before she let herself think one more time about what she'd just agreed to. She had agreed to it. She moved. Saturday morning came in the way that important mornings do not, with any particular drama, just ordinary and unremarkable. The sun doing what it did, Maya eating cereal and asking questions about whether it was weird that she found math easier than English, since everyone always said girls were supposed to be better at English, and Sienna answering on autopilot, while the other part of her mind ran quietly through what she was walking into. She had told Maya she had an errand. Again, it was becoming a word she was going to have to retire. "Mom," Maya said, "You've done the face." "What face?" "The face you do when you're thinking about something you're not telling me yet." Sienna looked at her daughter, 12 years old, seeing things that hadn't been named. "I'm going to meet the man I helped," she said. "Hawk, the man from the gas station." Maya stopped chewing. "The Hells Angels man?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because he asked me to, and because I think there's more to him than his vest." Maya thought about this with the thoroughness she applied to things. "Is it safe?" "I believe so," Sienna said. "Yes." "Are you sure, or do you believe so?" "Maya, those are different things, Mom." "I believe so," Sienna said again, "and I'm going to trust that." Maya looked at her for a long moment, and then she went back to her cereal, and after a moment she said, "Okay." Just that. "Okay." The clubhouse was on the east side of town in an industrial area she didn't know well, in a building that from the outside looked like a heavy-duty auto shop, which Cole had told her it partly was. She rode the bus for 40 minutes, which gave her time to think, and which she used instead to look out the window and not think, because she had found that sometimes the best preparation for something unknown was to arrive at it as empty as possible. Cole met her outside. He looked less careful than he had at the diner, more comfortable in his own context, which she understood everyone was a different version of themselves in the place where they belonged. "Hawk's inside," he said. "There are a few other people, but it's not," he searched for the word, "intimidating. They know who you are. They're not going to be weird about it." "What would weird look like?" Sienna said. "Grateful," Cole said, very loudly. He led her inside. There were 7 people in the main room. 4 men, 3 women, all in the same vest. They looked up when she came in, and she'd steeled herself for stares, but what she got instead was something more unexpected. A kind of collective, careful stillness, the stillness of people who have been told something and are trying very hard not to make it a bigger thing than the person in question can handle. Hawk was standing in the back of the room. He looked better than the hospital had shown him. Still tired, still slower than he probably usually was, but present in a way the machines and gown had muted. He crossed the room to her and he held out his hand, and she shook it, and his grip was firm in the way of someone who had always used his hands for serious things. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You said you wanted to show me something," Sienna said. "I do." He gestured. "Come here." He led her to a wall she hadn't focused on when she came in. It was covered floor to ceiling, end to end with papers. She thought for a moment that they were documents, reports, something official. But as she got closer, she understood what they were. Letters, handwritten letters, hundreds of them. Some typed, some in pen, some in pencil, some on good paper, and some on whatever had been near enough to reach. All of them addressed to Lily's legacy, all of them from families. She stepped close enough to read. "You paid our electric bill in January, and my kids were able to stay warm. And I don't know who you are, but I need you to know you saved us. My daughter was going to have to drop out of community college because we couldn't cover the gap in her financial aid. Someone mailed us a money order with no return address, and now she's still enrolled. I cry about it every time I think about it. We didn't have food for 3 days. There was a box on our porch when we got home from trying to figure out what to do. I still don't know how you knew." Sienna stood in front of this wall and she read. She read for a long time. Nobody spoke. The room was quiet behind her in the particular way of people who have given someone space and are honoring it. When she turned around, Hawk was watching her. 11 years, he said. 11 years, she said. "This is what you kept alive," he said, "when you stopped." She looked back at the wall, at the letters, at the hundreds of voices that had needed to write something down because the help had been real enough and important enough that they needed it to exist outside of themselves on paper and words. "How many people know you do this?" she said. "In the club, everyone in this room and a few others. Outside it," he shrugged one shoulder. "Almost no one. Why are you keeping it secret?" "Because the moment it becomes a story," Hawk said, "it becomes about us, and it's not about us, it's about them." He nodded at the wall. "The moment we start getting credit for it, we start doing it for the credit, even if we don't mean to. I've watched that happen to other organizations. I'm not letting it happen to this one." Sienna was quiet. "You run 2 jobs, Hawk said, and it wasn't a question. "Yes." 6 days a week. "Yes." "You've been doing it for a while," she said. "And you still stopped," he said. "On the worst night you'd had in that while with your last $8, and you still stopped." "It's not," she started. "I know it's not something you want talked about," he said. "I know you think you just did what anyone would do, but I've been on that ground, and I know what I counted how many people walked past, and I know you were the one who didn't, and I know what that cost you, and I think you should know what it bought." He looked at the wall, then back at her. 15 families, Sienna. 15 who were waiting. She breathed. She wanted to say something that was equal to the moment, and she couldn't find it. She looked at the wall of letters, at the handwriting of strangers who had been in the dark, and found a light they didn't expect. And she thought about cornflakes and a cracked phone screen, and $1.42, and the particular arithmetic of a life lived in the margins. She thought, "I know what it is to need something." She thought, "I know exactly what these letters mean." And she thought quietly in the part of herself she didn't usually show to strangers that she was standing in the right place. That whatever was coming next, whatever Hawk was going to ask her, whatever the neighborhood was going to decide, whatever the shape of the next thing turned out to be, she was standing in the right place. She turned away from the wall. "What did you want to ask me?" she said. Hawk met her eyes. "I want to offer you a job," he said. The room behind her was completely silent. Outside somewhere, a motorcycle started up, one engine, distant, turning over in the morning. Quiet, and it sounded in that moment less like thunder than like something beginning. The job offer sat inside Sienna for the rest of Saturday, like a stone she'd accidentally swallowed. Not painful exactly, but present in every breath, impossible to ignore. Hawk had laid it out simply the way he did most things, without ornamentation or pressure. A coordinator position with Lily's legacy, part-time to start transitioning to full-time within 60 days if she wanted it. A salary that was, when he said the number, so far above what Harlan's Diner in the Westfield Medical Pavilion combined were paying her that she made him repeat it because she was certain she'd misheard. She had not misheard. That's not a real number for a charity job, she said. We're not a traditional charity, Hawk said. And the work is real, finding families, vetting situations, coordinating, help managing relationships with the people inside the network who can deliver it. It takes someone who understands what need actually looks like from the inside. He looked at her evenly. You understand it. Because I'm poor, she said. Because you're perceptive, he said without flinching at her word. And because you stopped for a dying stranger when nobody else did, which tells me something about how you read a situation. She had not said yes on Saturday. She had said she needed to think, and Hawk had nodded like this was the right answer, and Cole had walked her back to the bus stop, and she had ridden home for 40 minutes with the number in her head and the letters on the wall in her memory and the sound of that single motorcycle turning over in the morning, which she kept hearing even though it was long gone. She had not told Maya about the offer. She had come home and made grilled cheese for dinner because it was Saturday. And grilled cheese was Saturday, one of the small rituals she had built into their life, because rituals were free and stability wasn't. And Maya had talked about a YouTube video she'd seen about deep-sea creatures, and Sienna had listened and laughed in the right places and waited until Maya was in bed before she sat at the kitchen table and let the full weight of it land on her. The number Hawk had named would change things. Not everything, not the fundamental mathematics of being a single mother in a city that was built for people with more, not the cracked phone screen or the tight weeks or the constant background arithmetic. But it would change enough. It would change the quality of the arithmetic. It would change whether she was always playing defense or whether she could sometimes play something else. But the question that kept her up until 2 in the morning was not about the money. The question was, what are you walking into, and do you know enough to walk into it safely? She didn't have an answer by 2. She didn't have one by 3. She fell asleep at the kitchen table and woke up at 5:15 with her face on her arms and the birds already starting outside and Maya's alarm set to go off in an hour, and she made coffee and she thought, I need more information before I can decide anything. And then she thought I should probably go to church. She hadn't been in 4 months, which was about par for someone who works 6 days a week, but the Reverend Gaines at New Hope, he knew her and knew Maya, and had on 2 separate occasions been part of the informal network that had kept their particular corner of the world from falling apart. And he was the kind of man whose opinion she trusted on matters that involved both practical judgment and moral clarity. She went to the 10 o'clock service. She sat in the back. She listened to the sermon, which happened to be about the parable of the Good Samaritan, which felt pointed enough to be almost funny. And after the service, she found Reverend Gaines in the hall. She told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which was one of his gifts, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, What does your gut tell you? My gut tells me Hawk is exactly what he says he is, Sienna said. And your head, my head says I don't know enough yet. And your heart, she looked at him. My heart keeps going back to the letters, she said. On the bottom of all those letters. Reverend Gaines nodded slowly. Then you already know what you're going to do, Stayu, he said. You're just still working up to saying it. She went home and called Hawk. I'm not saying yes yet, she said when he picked up. But I want to know more. I want to see more of how this works. I want to meet more of the people in it. Can you do that? Yes, he said, starting whenever you're ready. Monday, she said. Monday. She hung up and sat with the phone in her hand for a moment, and then she put it down and went to start on dinner, and the whole time the thought was running quiet in the back of her mind, like a current something is changing. You can feel it. Something is already different, and you can't go back to before you felt it. She was right. She just didn't know yet how different or how fast. Monday came and went, and then Tuesday, and then a week had passed, and Sienna had spent parts of 4 afternoons with Darlene, the woman from the text who turned out to be a compact, efficient woman in her late 40s, with close-cropped silver hair and reading glasses she wore on a chain, and a mind that moved like a spreadsheet, precise and quick and organized in ways that made Sienna feel simultaneously reassured and slightly inadequate. Darlene ran the operational side of Lily's legacy with the energy of someone who had been doing 2 jobs her entire adult life, which she had. She had worked as a social services case manager for 16 years before joining the network, and she knew every loophole in every system, every form that could be filed, every way that bureaucracy built traps for the people. It was theoretically designed to help. She was not soft, but she was not hard either. She was precise, and precision in the face of need was its own kind of love. She showed Sienna how it worked. The network had what Darlene called eyes people in communities who knew how to identify families in genuine crisis without being intrusive about it. Church volunteers, school counselors, ER nurses, utility workers who saw shut-off notices, librarians. Darlene said this with a particular emphasis, as if librarians were among the most reliable intelligence networks in the country, which Sienna, who had grown up going to the library when the apartment got too loud, entirely believed. When a family was identified, the information came to Darlene or to one of 3 other coordinators, and they assessed what was needed, how urgently what could be delivered without wading through systems that might flag the family or compromise their dignity. The last part was the one Darlene seemed to care about most fiercely. People who are in need, she said to Sienna on the second afternoon, sitting across from her at the small table in the back office of the clubhouse that served as their workspace, have usually already been made to feel like what they need is somehow their fault. And then the systems that are supposed to help them make them prove it, document it, wait for it, justify it. We don't do that. We figure out what the need is, we meet it, and we're gone. No paperwork, no waiting, no explaining yourself to anyone. How do you fund it? Sienna asked. The club contributes. There are people in the network, business owners mostly, who give regularly and quietly. We have one anonymous donor who has been giving a very significant amount annually for 6 years and who has never once told us their name or asked for anything in return. Darlene's mouth did something that was almost a smile. Hawk thinks it might be a former family we helped who got back on their feet and decided to pay it forward. He has no way of knowing. That's sort of the point. Sienna sat with it for a moment. And my role would be finding families, Darlene said. The way I described working the network, knowing the signs, building relationships with the eyes we have in communities we don't have good coverage in yet. You'd be carrying cases, you'd be coordinating delivery, and you'd be doing what you already know how to do without being trained, which is look at a person or a situation and know in your gut when something is real and when it isn't. You think I can do that? I think you already do it, Darlene said. I think you've been doing it your whole life with no resources and no support and no system behind you. I'm offering you the system. Sienna looked at the table. I still haven't said yes, she said. I know, Darlene said. Take your time. But time, as Sienna's life had always demonstrated, had its own schedule. It was Thursday when things changed. Not slowly the way she'd been expecting. Not the gradual accumulation of more information, more conversations, more careful internal deliberation. It changed the way the weather changes. When a front moves in fast, you look up and realize the sky is a different color than it was 10 minutes ago, and there's nothing to do but get inside or get wet. She was at Harlan's mid-morning rush when her phone buzzed in her apron, and she almost didn't check it. But something made her a feeling, a pull, the specific instinct she'd been developing over 2 weeks of learning to pay attention to things she couldn't fully articulate. It was Cole, not a text this time, a call. She stepped into the back corridor. Something's happened, Cole said, and his voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before. Not panic. Cole didn't seem like a person who panicked easily, but something tight and controlled that was managing something underneath it. What? She said. A family on Clement Street. Single mother, 3 kids, eldest is disabled, cerebral palsy, wheelchair, requires equipment. Their power got shut off this morning. Temperatures dropping tonight, and the kids' medical equipment runs on electricity. We've been trying to work it for 2 days, but there's a backlog at the utility company, and the equipment provider won't authorize a temporary battery solution without a form from the medical supplier. And the medical supplier says it'll take 5 business days. Stop, Sienna said. What's the mother's name? A pause. What? The mother? What's her name, Arthur? Angela Torres. How old are the kids? Eldest is 14, middle is 11, youngest is 7. What's the name of the utility company? Cole told her. She wrote it on her palm with the pen she kept tucked in her apron because the pad was always too slow. I know someone at that company, she said. Not officially. I went to school with a woman who works in their emergency services department. I haven't talked to her in 2 years, but I have her number. You can do that, Cole said. I don't know yet, Sienna said. Give me 45 minutes. She went back to her tables and she worked with one part of her brain for 20 minutes. and finished her section rotation, and then she went to her manager, a tired, decent man named Phil, who had known her for 3 years and who had on 2 separate occasions advanced her a day's wages. When a bill came early and she said, "Phil, I need a 30-minute personal break. It's a family emergency situation, not mine, someone else's." Phil looked at her for a moment and then looked at the clock and then looked at her again. 25 minutes, he said. "I can cover your section for 25. "Thank you," she said. She went outside and called the number. Her old classmate Vanessa picked up on the 4th ring, and Sienna could hear from the background noise that she was at work, and it wasn't a good time. But Vanessa said, "Sienna Clark, oh my God," in the voice of someone for whom old-school contacts arrive like a slightly unexpected gift. And Sienna talked fast and clear and precise, the way Darlene had been teaching her to think about situations, what is needed, how urgently, what needs to happen first. 18 minutes later, he'd had a verbal commitment that Angela Torres's power would be restored by end of business that day, classified as a medical emergency, which it technically and legitimately was. She went back inside and picked up her tables. That evening, she called Hawk. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. "Yes," she said. "I'll take the job." The silence on the other end of the line was the particular kind that comes from someone who was hoping for this and trying not to show how much. "Good," Hawk said. "I have conditions." "Tell me." "I give 3 weeks' notice at both my jobs. I do this right, not fast." "Agreed." "Maya comes first. If something is happening with Maya that needs me, I'm gone, and the work waits." "Of course. And I want to understand everything about how this is funded, not because I don't trust you, because I need to be able to trust it before I stake my reputation on it." "That's fair," Hawk said. "I'll have Darlene walk you through the full financial structure next week." "One more thing," she said. "Yes. I want to keep working with you directly on the harder cases, the ones that need someone who can read a room. I've been doing that my whole life without knowing it was a skill, and I don't want to spend this job behind a desk." Hawk was quiet for a moment. Then, "Sienna, that's exactly what I was going to ask of you." She hung up. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at the yellow walls and the paper stars, and she thought about Angela Torres and her 3 children and a piece of medical equipment that needed power to keep a 14-year-old safe through a cold night. And she thought about Vanessa's voice on the phone saying, "I'll see what I can do," because people said that all the time and didn't always mean it, but Vanessa had meant it. And she thought about 18 minutes. 18 minutes between a crisis and a solution, because she'd known who to call. The world was full of that, she thought. Full of those small, specific, uncatalogued pieces of knowing things people carried without realizing they were carrying them connections and competencies and pieces of lived experience that the world never asked for formally. But that could be the difference in the right moment between someone getting through the night or not. She had a lot of those pieces. She'd spent 31 years collecting them without intending to. Now she had somewhere to use them. The Friday of her last week at Harlan's was when the first thing happened that she didn't know how to explain. She was coming out of the diner at 2:30 when she noticed the motorcycle at the corner. A single bike parked rider still on it, not moving, not apparently going anywhere, just there. She wouldn't have thought anything of it, except that she recognized the vest even from that distance. And she noticed the rider nod once when she came out, barely perceptible, and then pull away. She called Cole. "Was that one of yours at the corner of Harlan's?" she said. A pause that lasted about 1 beat too long. Hawk asked a few people to. He stopped. He was worried. "About you, about the neighborhood situation." "He has people watching me." "Watching out," Cole said. "It's different." "Is it?" "Sienna." Cole's voice was patient but firm. "You know what you got involved in. Not the bad version, people imagine the real version. And the real version, the kind of work Lily's legacy does, sometimes makes people uncomfortable. People who prefer that need stays invisible." Hawk wanted to make sure. "He should have asked me," she said. "You're right," Cole said immediately. "He should have. I'll tell him. Tell him I don't need watching. Tell him I've been keeping myself and my daughter safe in this neighborhood for 12 years without anyone riding protection at my corners." "I'll tell him," Cole said. She was still irritated about it on the bus home, and then she was partially not irritated about it, which itself irritated her because she could see both things at once, the overreach and the intention behind it. And she wasn't sure she was in a position to demand clean lines between the two when the world didn't generally deal in clean lines. She was thinking about this still when she got off at her stop and found Terrence from across the alley, standing outside her building with his arms crossed and an expression that had left neutral some time ago. "Three of them today," he said. "Three of what bikes on this street?" He pointed like she might need directions to the street they were both standing on. Slow rolling, stopping one of them, talked to Mrs. Patterson. "You want to tell me what's going on?" Sienna breathed. She made a decision in about 4 seconds because 4 seconds was what she had. "I got offered a job," she said, "with the organization that man was part of. The man I helped. It's a humanitarian organization. They help families in crisis, quietly, no publicity. I've spent 2 weeks looking at how it works, and I believe in it. I took the job." Terrence stared at her. "A humanitarian organization," he said. "Yes, run by Hell's Angels. Run by a man named Robert Hawkins," she said, "who happens to have spent 30 years in a motorcycle club and who also happens to have spent 11 years quietly helping struggling families across 11 states without telling anyone about it." The silence between them had texture. "And the bikes on the street," Terrence said, "are something I didn't ask for and have already addressed," she said. "They won't be back." Terrence looked at her for a long moment. "Sienna," he said, and his voice had shifted. Still worried, but differently worried, the way it shifts when someone's argument is actually getting through. "You sure about this?" "I'm sure about the work," she said. "I'm sure about what I saw. I'm not sure about everything else because I'm not a person who pretends to be sure about things I can't verify. But yes, Terrence, I'm sure." He looked at her for another moment, then he uncrossed his arms. "You've been running doubles for 9 months," he said. "Yes." "And now somebody's offering you something better." "Yes." "And it's real, the helping people part." "That's actually what they do. I watched them restore power to a disabled child's medical equipment in 45 minutes on a case I helped with Tuesday," she said. "Yes, it's real." Terrence was quiet. "Okay," he said finally, which was the same word Maya had said with the same weight behind it. Not easy agreement, but the specific okay of someone deciding to trust a person they have reason to trust. He went back across the alley. Sienna went upstairs. She was checking Maya's homework at the kitchen table when her phone rang. "Hawk. Cole told me," he said. "Good. I'm sorry, you're right. It was overreach." "Yes," she said. "It was. It won't happen again without your permission." "Good," she said again. A pause. "How's the neighborhood situation being managed?" she said. Another pause, and then Hawk said, "I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it not as a threat or a promise I can't keep, but as information." "Okay." "There are people in this organization who know what you did, not just the core group you've met, people who've been with the club for 30 years, people in chapters in other states, people who heard about the woman who spent her last $8 on a man dying in a gas station lot." He paused. "These are people who understand what it costs to make that kind of choice, and they don't forget it." Sienna said nothing. "I'm not saying that to make you uncomfortable," Hawk said. "I'm saying it so you understand the full picture of what you stepped into. What you did didn't happen in a vacuum. It landed in a community that doesn't forget when someone treats one of their own as a human being worth saving." "How many people are we talking about?" she said slowly. "In our chapter, about 80 active members. In the broader network that knows what happened." He paused. "More. More," she repeated. "Sienna," his voice was careful, "is there anything happening in your neighborhood that's more serious than uncomfortable neighbors in a few conversations?" "Anything you haven't told me?" She thought about Mr. Patterson and his property values. She thought about Terrence and his arms crossed outside her building. She thought about Deb Kowalski and Rhonda and the weight of a community that was trying to decide what she was now. "Not yet," she said. "Okay," he said. "Call me if that changes." She didn't think much about that conversation afterward. She had too much to manage the last 2 weeks at Harlan's, the paperwork for her notice at the medical pavilion, the logistics of the transition, the ongoing cases Darlene was walking her through, and Maya, who needed help with a science fair project, and had also decided at the worst possible moment to start asking real questions about money and career and why people chose the work they chose. She didn't think much about it. Right up until the morning, everything changed. She heard them before she saw them. It was a Saturday, her first Saturday, Off from Harlan's in 9 months, a fact so disorienting that she'd woken up at 5:15 out of pure habit, and then lay in bed for 45 minutes trying to remember how to be a person who didn't have somewhere to be. She had eventually gotten up, made coffee, and was sitting at the kitchen table in the early quiet, both hands around her mug, looking at nothing in particular when she heard the sound. It started as a low vibration, not quite sound yet, more like a change in pressure, something the body registers before the ears catch up to it. She thought at first it was a truck on the main road, some early delivery, something ordinary. But it didn't pass. It grew. It became layered and complex, dozens of distinct vibrations weaving into each other until they were one enormous sustained rumble, and then she heard it clearly for what it was. Engines, motorcycle engines, dozens of them, all getting closer. She set down her mug very carefully. Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, hair disheveled, eyes still half asleep and rapidly waking up. "Mom, hi," Maya said. "What is that?" "I don't know yet," Sienna said, and she was already moving to the window. The street was full. Not full like she had ever seen it full, not the ordinary fullness of neighbors and kids and people going about their day. Full in a way that didn't have a civilian reference point. Motorcycles lined both sides from one end to the other, bumper to bumper, parked with a precision that suggested coordination, planned arrival, intentional formation. And there were riders still coming. She could hear them coming before she could see them. More engines adding to the vibration until the whole building seemed to be resonating with it. She counted. She tried to count, which was futile, but the instinct was there, and she stopped counting past 200 because the number was already larger than anything she'd expected and wasn't done arriving. Her phone rang. Hawk. "I need you to know," he said before she could speak, "that this was not my plan." "Then what is it?" she said. Her voice was completely flat, which was what happened when she was managing something her nervous system hadn't finished processing. "Word got out," Hawk said. "About you, about what you did. I told you there were people who knew." I didn't anticipate that they'd," he stopped. "About 30 members of our chapter decided to come by this morning, and then they called other chapters. And other chapters called others." "How many, Hawk?" He was quiet for one beat. "My best count right now is 450. Maya had come to stand beside her at the window. She was looking out at the street with an expression that was somewhere between awe and the beginnings of something she wasn't ready to name yet. "Mom," she said very quietly. "I see it," Sienna said. "Who are all those people?" "I'm still figuring that out," Sienna said. Into the phone she said, "What are they here to do?" "To say thank you," Hawk said. "That's it. That's the whole of it. They found out what you did and they came to say thank you. I know how it looks from the outside. I know what 450 motorcycles on a residential street looks like to people who don't have context. I am genuinely sorry about the..." "Don't apologize yet," she said. "Are they safe? Is this going to be..." "They are going to stand there quietly," Hawk said. "That is what they came to do, I promise you." She lowered the phone and looked out the window. She could already see from her angle that the neighbors were at their windows too. Mrs. Patterson, Rhonda, Deb Kowalski with one hand on her chest, like she was about to have a medical event of her own. Terrence, who had come to the door of his building across the alley and was standing perfectly still, looking at the street. The engines were shutting off now. One by one in clusters, the motorcycles going quiet until the street was filled with a different kind of noise, the sound of hundreds of people present without machinery, feet on pavement, low voices, the specific density of a crowd that has arrived with intention. "I need to go down there," Sienna said. "I'll be on your block in 3 minutes, Hawk said. She put the phone down. Maya was still at the window. "Stay up here," Sienna said. "Mom, stay up here until I tell you it's okay. Please." Maya looked at her, that 12-year-old face doing the thing it did where it was measuring something. "Is this because of the man you helped?" she said. "Yes. All of these people came because of that." "That's what I'm going to find out," Sienna said. She put on her shoes. She picked up her phone. She did not pick up anything else because there was nothing else to pick up. She was not going into anything armed or armored. She was going into it the way she went into everything, which was directly in with what she had. She went downstairs. She pushed open the building's front door and she walked out onto the steps, and the morning air hit her face and she looked up and out at the street and the sheer number of them. Hundreds of people, all in the same vests, all turned toward her building, all going still in a wave. As she appeared, and she felt something move through her that was not fear, though it lived in the same neighborhood. It was the specific feeling of being the center of something you didn't engineer and couldn't control, but which was happening because of a choice you made with clean hands. "Sienna Clark," said a voice from the front of the crowd. Hawk was walking toward her. He was moving slowly. He was still recovering. She could see it in the way he held himself, but he was walking with the bearing of someone who had led people through things before and knew what leadership looked like from the outside and was doing it deliberately. He stopped 10 feet from her. Behind him, 450 people were completely quiet. She could hear from the windows above the sound of her neighbors watching. She could feel the weight of the neighborhood holding its breath. "I told you these people don't forget," Hawk said. His voice was even, but it carried the way voices carry when there's nothing competing with them, when hundreds of people are giving a voice the silence it needs to reach them. When word got out about what you did, not just stopping, but the money, the aspirin, the 11 minutes on the ground with him when everyone else walked past, people wanted to come. "I didn't organize this. This organized itself." "I can see that," Sienna said. "I know it's a lot," he said. "I know your neighbors are watching. I know what they're thinking." "What are they thinking?" Sienna said. "The same thing everyone thinks when they see us," he said. "Before they know." He turned slightly and his voice rose just enough. "We're going to tell them," he said. "If you'll let us." She looked at him. She looked at the street full of people who had driven from places she didn't know to stand in front of a building they'd never seen because of $8 and aspirin and 11 minutes. She looked up at the windows where her neighbors were watching. Deb, with her hand on her chest, Terrence absolutely, still the Pattersons side by side, Rhonda with her arms crossed, but her face open in a way it hadn't been all week. She looked at Hawk. "Start talking," she said, and he did. He didn't use a microphone. He didn't need one. He talked the way men talk who have spent decades making themselves heard over the sound of engines from the chest clean and direct, not performing, but delivering. He told the street about Lily, about 17 years old in a hospital corridor and a mother eating crackers from a vending machine, about what it felt like to show up too late to the only person who had ever made him want to be better, and to decide that the rest of his life was going to be the answer to that failure. He told them about Lily's legacy. He talked for 8 minutes and the street was silent for all 8 of them. Sienna watched her neighbors. She watched Deb Kowalski's hand slowly drop from her chest. She watched Terrence sit down on his front step like his legs had made a decision without consulting him. She watched Mrs. Patterson take her husband's hand without seeming to realize she'd done it. She watched Rhonda, who had told her to be careful, who had been thinking about high school registration, and long memories start to cry quietly in her window, with the particular lack of self-consciousness of someone who has been caught off guard by something real. "Sienna Clark did something that night," Hawk said, and now he turned toward her, and 450 people turned with him, the way a tide turns all at once unrehearsed. "She did what we talk about wanting to be. She saw a person who needed help, and she helped him, and she spent her last $8 doing it, and she didn't walk past." The silence after this lasted about 3 seconds. And then someone in the crowd started to clap. It spread, not the polite kind, not the performance kind, but the kind that starts from somewhere real and becomes unstoppable because it's carrying something that has nowhere else to go. It moved through 450 people in about 10 seconds, and it was still moving when Sienna felt Maya beside her. Saya, who had not stayed upstairs, who was 12 years old and had come down anyway, who was standing at Sienna's elbow with wide eyes and her pajamas still on and her hair still a project. "Mom," Maya said, barely audible under the sound of the crowd. "I told you to stay upstairs," Sienna said. "I know," Maya said. "I couldn't." Sienna looked at her daughter. She looked at the street. She looked at Hawk, who was watching her with the expression of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just in this moment set part of it down. And in the windows of her building, in the building across the alley, in the houses on either side of the street, she saw her neighbors, the ones who had been afraid, the ones who had judged, the ones who had knocked on her door with their careful concerns and their social management, watching a street full of people in leather vests, clap for a woman who worked doubles 6 days a week and had spent her last $8 on a stranger's life. She saw them watching, and she saw on their faces the thing happening that could not be undone once it started. Understanding. Not agreement necessarily. Not the erasure of everything they believed before, but understanding the specific irreversible shift that happens when a person sees something real that doesn't fit the story they've been telling, and the story has to change to accommodate it. The street was loud with the sound of it. Maya's hand found hers. Sienna held it. She stood on the steps of her building in the morning sun with 450 bikers on her street, and her daughter's hand in hers, and her neighbors watching from their windows, and she thought about the gas station lot at midnight, and the moment she'd almost kept walking, and what would have been different if she had. Everything she thought, everything would have been different. She was very glad she had not kept walking. The applause lasted longer than Sienna expected. She had stood on those steps and received it the only way she knew how, quietly, without performing gratitude or deflecting it, just letting it be what it was. Maya's hand in hers the whole time, warm and steady, the grip of a 12-year-old who had come downstairs against instructions and was not sorry about it. When the sound finally settled, Hawk turned back to the crowd and said something she couldn't hear from where she stood, and then the formation of 450 people did something she hadn't anticipated. They didn't leave. They didn't stay in the street in a mass either. They broke apart, not randomly, not in confusion, but with the organized ease of people who had been told what to do next and were now doing it, and they began to move outward through the street toward the neighbors. She understood it before she could have explained it. They weren't there for Sienna only. They had come for the neighborhood. She watched a man in his 50s with a gray braid down his back walk directly to Mr. Patterson's front steps and knock, and she watched Mr. Patterson open the door with his expression of a man preparing for one kind of conversation, and then recalibrate visibly when the man outside him said in a perfectly normal voice, "Good morning, sir. I was wondering if there was anything in or around your property that needed attention today. We have people here who know how to fix things." She watched Mrs. Patterson come to the door behind her husband and look at the man on the steps and say, and Sienna was close enough to hear this, "The back fence has been broken for 2 years. My husband's hip makes it hard to," and the man said, "Show me," and followed them around the side of the house without further preamble. She watched Cole, who had materialized from somewhere in the crowd, carry 3 bags of groceries to Rhonda's door without being asked, set them on the mat, ring the bell, and walk away before Rhonda answered it. She watched 2 women from the group sit down on the curb with Mrs. Delgado from the downstairs apartment, who had come out with her walker and looked more bewildered than afraid. And within 4 minutes, all 3 of them were in a conversation that involved a lot of hand gestures and what appeared to be a shared photograph being passed around. Maya tugged her hand. "Mom," she said, they're helping people." "Yes," Sienna said, "like just doing it. Nobody asked them." "No," Sienna said, "nobody asked them." Maya was quiet for a moment watching. Sienna watched her watch. The expression on her daughter's face was one she recognized, not the wide-eyed awe of a child encountering something surprising, but the specific focused quality of a person filing something away, sorting it into a category of things that would matter later. Hawk came to stand beside her. "I should have told you this was coming," he said. "You told me you didn't organize it," she said. "I didn't organize it, but I should have anticipated it and told you anyway." He paused. "I should have done a lot of things differently in the last 2 weeks." "Yes," she said, and left it there because he already knew which things and didn't need a list from her. They stood side by side on the steps, watching the street reorganize itself into something that didn't have a name. She knew something between a block party and a repair crew, in a conversation that had been waiting to happen for the whole time the neighborhood had been afraid of what it didn't understand. "Tell me about the neighbors," Hawk said, "the ones who were scared." She told him. Not everything, but the shape of it. Mr. Patterson's property values and Deb Kowalski's warnings, and Terrence in his arms crossed outside her building, and Rhonda, who had been genuinely kind and genuinely worried at the same time. She told it without judgment because she had never been able to sustain judgment toward people who were afraid, having been afraid herself more times than she could count. Hawk listened. "The woman with the walker," he said. "Mrs. Delgado, she lives in your building." "Downstairs from me," Sienna said. "She watches Maya sometimes on Sunday mornings." "What does she need?" Sienna thought about it. "Her bathroom grab bars are loose. She mentioned it to me in September. I kept meaning to." Hawk raised his hand, a small gesture. 20 seconds later, a man detached from the group near Mrs. Delgado and went up to speak to her and the conversation that followed ended with him going inside with her, and Sienna knew the grab bars would be fixed before the morning was over. "You don't have to do all of this," Sienna said. "We want to," Hawk said simply. "Because of me. Because it's what we do," he said. "You're why we're here. But this," he gestured at the street, "this is just what happens when you put a group of people who know how to fix things in a neighborhood that needs things fixed." Sienna looked at the street. Terrence had come across the alley. She saw him approach a cluster of riders near the corner and say something, and the rider he said it to listened and then gestured, and then Terrence was shaking his hand, and the quality of Terrence's body had changed from the arms-crossed version she'd been watching all week. He was upright now, present, the crossed arms gone. Deb Kowalski had come outside. She had dressed for it. That was the detail Sienna noticed, because Deb never came outside in anything less than her full self, and the fact that she had put on her good cardigan and her good shoes before coming down to the street was its own kind of statement about how seriously she was taking this. She was standing near the base of the building step, watching, not yet moving toward anyone but not retreating either, which for Deb Kowalski was a meaningful position. "Go talk to her," Hawk said. "You could tell what I was thinking," Sienna said. "You've been watching her for 2 minutes," he said. She went down the steps. Deb turned when she heard her, and her face did the thing it always did when she was trying to reassemble her position, a micro-adjustment, a slight squaring of the shoulders, the specific expression of a person who has been wrong about something and is in the process of deciding how to handle it. "Sienna," she said. "Deb." They stood for a moment. "The man fixing Mrs. Delgado's grab bars," Deb said. "One of them." "Yes." "She's been asking the landlord about those for a year," Deb said. "I know. He's doing it for free." "They don't do things for money," Sienna said. Deb looked at her. The squaring of the shoulders had softened. In its place was something that was trying to be honest without quite knowing how to get there. "I said some things this week," Deb said. "Yes," Sienna said. "You did." "I wasn't wrong to be concerned," Deb said. And Sienna gave her this because it was true. The concern hadn't been wrong, only the conclusions she'd drawn from it. "No," Sienna said. "You weren't wrong to be concerned." "But I was—" Deb stopped. She looked at the street, at the men fixing the fence at Cole walking back from Rhonda's doorstep, at the women talking with Mrs. Delgado, at Terrence shaking someone's hand at the corner. "I was working with the wrong picture," she finally said. "We usually are," Sienna said, "until we get a better one." Deb was quiet. "Your daughter came down in her pajamas," she said, which was not what Sienna had expected her to say. "Yes," Sienna said. "She wasn't scared." Deb said, "I was watching from the window. The whole street is out here, and Maya just—" She made a gesture. "She just walked out and stood next to you like it was ordinary." "She's braver than me," Sienna said. "She's like you," Deb said, and it came out soft, which was not a register Deb operated in often. Sienna looked at her neighbor, this woman who had known her for 4 years, who brought casseroles when she was sick, and monitored the building with the dedication of a one-person neighborhood watch, and had her own fears and her own history that Sienna didn't know all of, same as everyone, and she felt something she recognized as a specific compound emotion of being correctly seen by someone you'd written off as seeing you wrong. "Come meet Hawk," Sienna said. Deb hesitated for a half second. Then she nodded. The morning went longer than anyone had planned. The fence in the Pattersons' yard took 2 hours because once the 2 men who started it looked at the full situation, they decided to address the gate hinges and the rotted post that the fence was connected to. And the Pattersons stood in their yard watching this happen, and Mr. Patterson periodically tried to help and was gently redirected until he gave up and brought out 2 lawn chairs and just sat there with his wife watching. Mrs. Patterson brought out lemonade at 11:30. This was, Sienna thought, the moment things turned in some fundamental way. Not the applause, not Hawk's speech, not the fixing of the fence, or the grab bars or the 3 other small household repairs that materialized throughout the morning as people talked to each other and discovered what was needed. It was the lemonade. It was Carol Patterson's 63-year-old daughter of a woman who had fled Mississippi in 1962 and believed in hospitality the way some people believe in oxygen, carrying a tray of lemonade glasses to the men fixing her fence, because that was what you did when people were doing something good in your yard. It was the small, ordinary, irreversible act of a woman extending her household to people she'd been afraid of 6 hours ago. Sienna watched it happen and felt it register somewhere deep. She was talking to a woman named Josephine, one of the 3 women from the group, who turned out to be a retired nurse from Dayton, who had been riding with her late husband for 20 years and had joined Lily's legacy after he passed because the alternative was sitting in a quiet house when she heard Mr. Patterson's voice rise from the backyard, not in anger, in laughter. She turned to look, and one of the men fixing the fence had said something, and Mr. Patterson was laughing genuinely the way men laugh when something lands right with his whole chest. And the man was grinning back, and the fence was half done, and Carol was standing there with an empty tray and a full expression. Josephine, who had been explaining the Lily's legacy intake process with the precision of someone who had been a nurse for 30 years and organized information, the way other people breathed, stopped talking and looked at the backyard. "There it is," she said quietly to no one in particular. "What?" Sienna said. "The moment when people remember," Josephine said, "that they already know how to do this. Treat each other like people." She looked at Sienna sideways. "We don't make that happen, you know. We just show up and people remember." Sienna thought about this for a long time afterward. She was still thinking about it when Terrence appeared at her elbow at noon with a bottle of water and an expression that was the most open she'd ever seen on his face. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You were protecting the neighborhood," Sienna said. "I was protecting my idea of the neighborhood," he said. "Not the same thing." He looked at the street, which was still full of people, but differently. The motorcycles were still there, but people had moved among them, and small conversations had formed and dissolved and reformed, and somewhere someone had produced sandwiches, and Sienna didn't know from where, but there were sandwiches. "Man who fixed my gutters this morning," Terrence said. Sienna hadn't known about the gutters. "One of them found a nest up there," Terrence said. "Oh, raccoons. Had them last fall and I thought they were gone. He cleared it out and fixed the screen, and then he went and got sealant from somewhere. I don't even know where he got sealant and sealed the entry point." He paused. "Didn't charge me anything. Didn't ask anything, just did it." "That's what they do," Sienna said. Terrence looked at her. "I know that now," he said. "That's what I'm trying to tell you. I know that now." He held out his hand. She shook it. It was such a small gesture, and it carried so much the weight of 2 weeks of tension of Terrence standing with her arms crossed, of the neighborhood trying to decide what she was now, and the decision landing in a handshake on a Saturday noon, with sandwiches appearing from nowhere, and laughter coming out of the Pattersons' backyard. Matata. Hawk found her at 1:15 when the morning had stretched into afternoon, and the street had reorganized itself again. Some people had left, more were still there, and the energy had shifted from the charged intensity of the arrival into something quieter and more sustained, like a tide that had come in and settled rather than retreating. "Can we sit somewhere?" he said. They sat on her front steps, which had become over the course of the morning a kind of informal meeting point, the place where conversations drifted and resolved and sometimes began again. "I want to tell you something I haven't told you yet," Hawk said. "There's more," Sienna said. "There's always more," he said. "That's the nature of things you've been carrying a long time." He looked at his hands. The tattoos on his arms in the afternoon light were detailed and layered, and she'd been around him enough now that she'd stopped noticing them the way she had at first, and had started noticing the hands themselves, large, careful hands, the kind that had spent decades doing physical work. "Lily used to talk about fairness," he said. "Not justice. She knew the world wasn't always just. Even at 17, she knew that. Fairness was different to her. She said fairness was what you created when you showed up for someone who couldn't make the world show up for them." Sienna listened. "I built Lily's legacy on that definition," he said. "Everything we do is that definition. Find the person the world isn't showing up for. Show up." He paused. "But I've been running it like an operation for 11 years. Efficiently, precisely, good intake, good delivery, good follow-through. And somewhere in that 11 years, I forgot what it felt like to just stop, the way you stopped." "You had a heart attack," Sienna said. "That changes your perspective." "It wasn't the heart attack," he said. "It was the 11 minutes before you got there, lying on the ground and watching people not stop." He was quiet for a moment. "I've spent 11 years helping people. And in 11 minutes on the ground, I understood what it feels like to be the one who needs it. And I understood that all the logistics in the world, all the coordination and the intake and the delivery doesn't replace the thing you did, which is just stay. Be there. Don't leave." Sienna looked at him. "You think the organization has lost that?" she said. "I think it's in danger of it," he said. The bigger we get, the more we look like a machine, and machines don't sit with people on the ground. Is this why you want me? She said. Not for the coordination, for the other thing. Both, he said. I want both, but yes. The other thing, he looked at her directly. You sat with me for 11 minutes in the dark and talked to me like I was worth talking to. I hadn't felt that he stopped, a long time. The afternoon was warm and the street was still full of the residue of the morning. A few motorcycles remaining a group in conversation near the corner, Mrs. Delgado out on her stoop with two women from the group, and what appeared to be a plate of cookies because Mrs. Delgado processed hospitality through cookies the way other people processed it through words. I need to ask you something, Sienna said, and I need you to answer it straight. Go ahead. The night at the gas station. Cole said you were coordinating something. 15 families were in the middle of being helped. That if you died, they would have fallen through. Was that the whole situation, or was there more to it than that? Hawk was quiet for a moment. There's more, he said. Tell me, he told her. The situation had been larger than 15 families. Those were the immediate cases, the ones in active process, the ones where help was already moving toward people who were waiting for it. But there was a broader situation underneath a coordinated effort that Lily's legacy had been building for 2 years, working with a network of social workers and healthcare providers across 3 states to identify a population of elderly individuals who were falling through every gap in every system. Simultaneously, too much income for assistance, not enough for stability, too proud, or too isolated to ask for help, invisible to the systems that were supposed to catch them. Hawk had been the architect of the whole structure. Not the only person. Darlene was central, and 2 other coordinators in other states, but the person who held the relationships, who had spent 2 years building trust with the network of providers who were feeding them cases. If he had died on that lot, the relationships would have had to be rebuilt from scratch by someone else, and the timeline would have slipped by at least a year, and in that year, the people who were waiting would keep waiting. Sienna listened to all of this without interrupting. When he finished, she said, how many elderly individuals in those 3 states are we talking about? Our current estimate, Hawk said, is somewhere between 800 and 1,200 who meet the profile. She breathed. 800 to 1,200 people who had been waiting invisibly for 2 years of careful work to reach them. And it had nearly ended on a gas station lot because one man had been alone on the ground and everyone else had walked past. Why didn't you have someone with you that night? She said. He looked slightly uncomfortable for the first time in their conversation. I was meeting someone, he said. Someone outside the organization. A potential donor. Someone who wanted the meeting off the record, no other people present. I got there early and my chest started. He stopped. I was a fool, he said. I know it. You were a person who made a decision that almost cost 1,000 people their safety net, she said. I'm not judging you. I'm telling you what it was. I know what it was, he said. And the donor, she said. Did you ever meet with them? Something shifted in his expression. Not evasion calculation, the look of someone deciding how much to give and concluding that the full amount was the right measure. That's the other thing I need to tell you, he said. She waited. The donor found out about what happened, about the heart attack, about who helped, about the $8. He paused. They contacted Darlene last week. And they want to triple their annual contribution, Hawk said. Because of you. Because they said. He reached into his vest pocket and took out his phone and found something and read it to her. They said any organization whose work produces a woman who spends her last $8 on a stranger's life is an organization I want to fully invest in. Sienna sat with this. Triple, she said. Yes. What does that mean in practical terms? It means we can expand the elderly program by 18 months, Hawk said. It means we can hire 2 more coordinators. It means we can reach those 800 to 1,200 people in about a third of the time we'd projected. She looked at the street, at Mrs. Delgado and her cookies, at Terrence talking to someone near the corner, at Carol Patterson bringing another round of lemonade to the backyard. She thought about $8. She had thought about it a lot over the past 2 weeks, in the quiet moments, in the way you think about a pivot point after the pivot has already happened, and you're looking back at it from the other side. The smallness of $8, the fact that she'd had exactly $8 to give and had given all of it without measuring, without holding back the rational portion that survival logic would have told her to keep. She had not known, standing at that gas station counter at midnight, that she was making a decision that would reach 800 to 1,200 people she would never meet. She had been thinking about aspirin. She had been thinking about a man dying on the ground. That was all. She was beginning to understand exactly the point. I want to work on the elderly program, she said. Hawk looked at her. Specifically, she said, I want it to be part of my role, the outreach to the elderly population. She stopped and then started again. I understand what it is to be invisible to systems that are supposed to help you. I understand it from the inside. And I think the people you are trying to reach are going to be easier to reach by someone who understands that, not someone with a clipboard and a title. I agree, Hawk said. I'll still do the coordination work, she said. The intake, the delivery, all of it. But I want the elderly program to be mine. Done, he said. It was, she thought, the easiest negotiation she'd ever had, which was either a sign that she'd asked for exactly the right thing or a sign that she should have asked for more. She decided, looking at him, that it was the former. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They sat for a moment in the afternoon quiet of the street, and somewhere someone was still working. She could hear the sound of a tool, a drill, or a wrench coming from the direction of the Pattersons' fence, and the sound was ordinary and good, the sound of a thing being fixed. It was Rhonda who broke her open, though she didn't intend to. It was mid-afternoon, 3 o'clock or close to it, and most of the crowd had dispersed by then, the motorcycles leaving in ones and twos and threes, the street gradually returning to itself, but differently. The way a room looks different after you've rearranged it, even if all the furniture is back in roughly the same place. Rhonda came and found her near the building entrance and touched her arm. Can I say something? Rhonda said. Of course, Sienna said. I told you to be careful, Rhonda said. I told you about Maya in high school and long memories. You did, Sienna said. I was thinking about the wrong things, Rhonda said. I was thinking about how the world would see you, what it would cost you. She looked at the street, at the retreating motorcycles, at Terrence across the alley, who was standing in his own doorway, watching them leave with an expression that was entirely different from the one he'd had this morning. I wasn't thinking about what it would give. You couldn't have known, Sienna said. No, Rhonda said. But you did. You knew on some level what you were doing when you stopped, didn't you? Sienna thought about this honestly. I didn't know anything, she said. I saw a man and I stopped. That's the whole of what I knew. That's what I mean, Rhonda said. That's what you knew, that he was a man and he needed help. You didn't need the rest of it to stop. You just stopped. She squeezed Sienna's arm and went back inside, and Sienna stood in the doorway, and the thing that cracked open this time didn't close back up immediately the way it usually did. It stayed open for a moment long enough for her to feel the full weight of the last 2 weeks pass through it. The $13, the aspirin, the 11 minutes, the letters on the wall, the 15 families, the 800 to 1,200 people, the lemonade and the laughter from the Pattersons' backyard, and Terrence shaking her hand, and Deb's face in the window, and Maya in her pajamas walking out into a street full of strangers because she wasn't afraid. Because her mother didn't walk past things. And Maya had been watching her mother not walk past things for 12 years, and it had made her someone who didn't need to be told when something was real and when it required her presence, who just came downstairs anyway. Sienna stood in her doorway and held herself very still until the feeling finished moving through her, and then she straightened and went inside. Maya was at the kitchen table doing homework. The cereal bowl from breakfast was still on the counter, washed and drying. The paper stars above the window were lit by the afternoon sun, throwing small shadows on the yellow walls. They're mostly gone, Maya said without looking up. Most of them, Sienna said. Are you okay? Yes, Sienna said. And then are you? Maya looked up at that, looked at her mother with those eyes that saw too much. I think so, Maya said carefully. I think I'm still working out what happened today. Me too, Sienna said. The man with the braid fixed Mr. Patterson's fence, Maya said. I saw. And Mrs. Delgado got grab bars. I know. And Cole left groceries for Rhonda. Yes. Why, Maya said, not a challenge genuine. The real question underneath everything else she'd watched today. I mean, I get it, they were saying thank you to you. But why like this? Why not just, I don't know, a gift card or something? Sienna sat down across from her daughter. Because what you do, she said, slowly working it out as she said it, is what you understand. And what they understand is showing up, being physically present in a place where something needs doing and doing it. That's the language they speak. So when they wanted to say something big enough to be heard, that's how they said it. Maya thought about this. Like how you make grilled cheese when I'm having a bad week, she said. Sienna looked at her. Yeah, Sienna said, like that. Maya went back to her homework. Sienna sat at the table with her and didn't do anything for a moment, just sat, which was not something she did often, in which her body didn't quite know what to do, with the stillness, the absence of the next task pulling at her. She thought about what Darlene had told her about the intake process and the cases in the pipeline and the elderly program and the timeline that had just shortened by 18 months because of a donor response to $8 in a bottle of aspirin. She thought about Hawk saying all the logistics in the world doesn't replace the thing you did. She thought about Josephine saying we don't make that happen. People already know how to treat each other. We just show up and they remember. The street outside was quiet now, or nearly. She could hear distantly the last few engines, one then, one more, then silence. The motorcycles were gone, the fence was fixed, the grab bars were secure, the gutters were clear, the lemonade glasses were in someone's kitchen being washed. And the street was its own street again, but it would never be quite what it had been this morning. Because this morning had happened, and you couldn't unhappen something once it had moved through people the way this had. You could try to return to the familiar grooves of what you'd believed before, and some people would at least partially because that was human nature. But the Pattersons had given lemonade to the men who fixed their fence, and Terrence had shaken hands, and Deb Kowalski had stood on the steps and talked to Hawk for 20 minutes, and Sienna had watched her face change in real time. Watch the picture update itself. Watch the woman she'd known for 4 years become someone who knew more than she had that morning. That didn't unhappen. Her phone buzzed. Darlene, good day's work. Call me Monday about the Torres follow-up, and I want to walk you through 2 new cases that came in this week. Also, Hawk told me about the elderly program request. That's the right instinct. We'll talk about structure. Sienna typed back Monday. Thank you. She put the phone on the table. Mom, Maya said. Is this your job now? For real? For real, Sona, Sienna said. Maya processed this with the thoroughness she applied to significant things. Are you happy about it? She said. Sienna thought about it honestly, the way she tried to think about things that mattered. I'm not sure happy is exactly the word, she said. It's more like she looked for it. It's more like I found out something fits that I didn't know was supposed to fit, like a key in a lock I didn't know I was carrying. Maya looked at her steadily. That's a good thing, she said. Yeah, Sienna said, it is. Maya went back to her homework. The afternoon light moved on the kitchen walls. The paper stars threw their small shadows. Outside, the last motorcycle engine turned over once and then faded, and the street was its own quiet self, and Sienna Clark sat at her kitchen table in the life she had built from nothing, in the neighborhood where she was known, and she thought about what came next, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, what came next didn't feel like a thing to brace for. It felt like a thing she was ready for. She put her hands flat on the table. She breathed. She was ready. Monday came in hard and fast, the way Mondays do, when your life has changed shape and the new shape still doesn't feel entirely like something that belongs to you. Sienna was at the Lily's Legacy office by 8:15, the back room of the clubhouse that Darlene had converted into a functional workspace with 2 desks, a filing cabinet that locked a whiteboard covered in color-coded notations, and a coffee maker that Darlene treated with the seriousness most people reserve for medical equipment. The room smelled like coffee and the particular dry paper smell of organized work, and Sienna had been in it 4 times now, and already it felt more like hers than the break corridor at Harlan's had ever felt in 3 years. Darlene was already there. She was always already there. Sienna was beginning to think Darlene might actually live in the building and simply declined to mention it. Torres follow up first, Darlene said without looking up from whatever she was annotating. Then the 2 new cases. Then I want to show you the intake structure for the elderly program and get your read on the outreach strategy. Good morning, Sienna said. Darlene looked up. Something moved across her face that was the Darlene equivalent of a warm smile, precise, brief, genuine. Good morning, she said. Sit down. The Torres follow-up was clean. Angela Torres's power had stayed on. Her eldest son's equipment was running. She had called the intake line 3 times in the past week. Not with problems, but to check in, which Darlene said was a pattern. She recognized the pattern of someone who had been helped and couldn't quite believe it wasn't going to be taken away, and so needed to keep confirming it was real. What do we do with that? Sienna said. We answer every time, Darlene said. We answer and we don't make her feel foolish for calling. Eventually she'll believe it. How long does that usually take? Depends on how many times the world has taken things away from her before. Darlene said it plainly without drama as a clinical fact. For some people, weeks. For some people, months. For a few, a long time. She looked at Sienna. You know this. I do, Sienna said. Good. Then you know the follow-up is as important as the initial intervention. Sometimes more. We're not a one-delivery service. We stay in it until the person is stable enough that they stop needing to check. They moved through the 2 new cases with a speed and precision that Sienna found she could keep up with, which surprised her. She had expected to feel behind, to feel the gap between what Darlene knew and what she knew. And the gap was there, but it was traversable. She could see the shape of the work. She could see where her instincts fit inside the structure Darlene had built. It was the feeling of stepping into a role that had been waiting for someone with a specific set of damage and knowledge, and she had both. At 10 o'clock, a hawk came in. He had more color than the hospital version and less of the careful slowness, though he wasn't at full capacity, and she could see him managing it, the way he sat down before he had been standing long enough to need to, the way he breathed before answering the small compensations of a body that had recently reminded its owner of its limits. How's it going? He said. Ask me in a week, Sienna said. That means fine, Darlene said. Hawk smiled. I want to talk about Clark House, he said. Sienna set down her pen. They had mentioned it once briefly in the conversation about her job offer, the idea of a community resource center in her neighborhood, a physical space that Lily's legacy could anchor and use as a hub for the kind of work that was currently done entirely through invisible networks. She had filed it away as a large idea that lived in the future, the kind of thing that was good to want, but remote from anything that could happen soon. It's not future, Hawk said, reading her expression with the accuracy she'd stopped being surprised by. It's now. We have a building on Clement Street 3 blocks from you. Been sitting empty for 2 years because the previous tenant left, and the owner is someone in our network who's been looking for a purpose for it. Darlene's run the numbers. Darlene slid a single page across the desk. Sienna looked at it. She was not by training a person who read financial documents fluently. She was a person who had spent her adult life reading budget lines and knowing exactly what they meant in practical terms, which was a different but sometimes more precise skill. She read the page the way she read her own budget, looking for what was real, what was possible, what required what. What it said in practical terms was that a community resource center at the Clement Street building was financially viable within 60 days, that the donor whose annual contribution had tripled was willing to provide a one-time capital allocation for the build-out, that staffing could begin immediately because there were people in the network who could provide services, a retired pharmacist, 2 social workers, a legal aid attorney who had been volunteering her time through Lily's legacy for 3 years and had been asking for a physical location to do it from. You said Clark House, Sienna said. You're running it, Hawk said. She looked up from the page. I've been here 5 days, she said. You've been building toward it your whole life, he said. 5 days is just when you started getting paid for it. She held his gaze for a moment. I want to name it Lily's House, she said, not Clark House. Something moved across Hawk's face that was the hardest thing she'd seen from him. Harder than the hospital bed, harder than the letters on the wall. That's Lily's name, he said. I know, she said. The legacy is invisible on purpose. But a community center isn't invisible. It needs a name that means something. And Lily is why this whole thing exists. People who walk through that door should walk through a name that has that story in it. The room was very quiet. Darlene was not annotating anything. Hawk looked at the table. He was quiet for long enough that Sienna wondered if she'd gotten it wrong, if the name was too private, if Lily was something he carried that he couldn't share in that particular way. She was about to take it back to say she'd been overstepping when he looked up. His eyes were wet. He didn't seem to notice or to care. Lily's House, he said. Yes, Sienna said. Yes, he said. Okay, yes. Darlene made a note. Her hand was not entirely steady. The weeks that followed had a quality Sienna had never experienced before in her working life, which was the quality of moving fast in a direction that felt right. Not easy, nothing about the work was easy, and she made mistakes, and there were cases that didn't resolve cleanly, and situations where she second-guessed herself, and mornings where she got in early and looked at the whiteboard and felt genuinely small in the face of the need mapped out on it. But underneath all of it, running like a current, she could feel but not always see, was the sense that this was the right place for the specific person she was. She worked the elderly program with the intensity of someone who understood it personally. She developed outreach relationships with 3 senior centers, 2 hospital discharge units, and a network of home health aides who saw the same invisible population in their daily rounds. People who had fallen into the gap between too much and not enough, who were managing alone, and had been managing alone long enough that they'd forgotten they had any right to ask for something different. Her first solo case was a man named Earl. Darlene had flagged him from a referral out of a home health agency, 74 years old, retired steelworker widower, living alone in a house he'd owned for 40 years, which was the primary asset standing between him and a dignity he could no longer afford to maintain. The house needed a new water heater. The pipes had been gradually worsening for 2 years. He had been rationing hot water with the precision of a man who had learned to ration everything and had been doing it so long he'd stopped thinking of it as hardship and had started thinking of it as just the way things were. He had not asked for help. He would not have asked. The home health aide who came twice a week had mentioned it obliquely in a general report because she knew how to notice without making a person feel exposed. Sienna called Earl on a Tuesday morning. She had thought about how to do it the night before going through it, the way she prepared for things that mattered, not scripting it, but feeling for the shape of it. She knew from her own experience and from the 6 weeks she'd spent watching Darlene work that how you made the first contact was almost everything. Too official and people closed. Too casual and people didn't trust the competence behind it. The register had to be, I'm a real person. This is a real conversation and I'm not here to make you explain yourself. Earl answered on the 3rd ring with the slightly formal phone voice of someone from a generation that treated the telephone as an instrument deserving of ceremony. Mr. Earl Briggs, she said. Beacon Bomb, he said. My name is Sienna Clark. I'm with a community resource organization called Lily's Legacy. I got your name from the Home Health Network, and I want to be straight with you about why I'm calling. All right, he said. I understand you've had some trouble with your water heater, she said, and I'm not calling to pry into your situation. I'm calling because we have people who can fix that, and we don't charge for it, and there's no paperwork, and no waiting list, and no means test. I'm calling to ask if you'd like us to come take a look. The silence on the other end lasted about 6 seconds. She waited. She didn't fill it. I've been making do, Earl said. I know, she said. You're good at making do. That's clear. I'm just saying you don't have to if you don't want to. Another silence, shorter this time. What's the catch, he said. There isn't one, she said. I know that sounds like exactly what someone with a catch would say. So I'll tell you this, call me back if you want after you've thought about it. I'll give you my number. Take a week if you need it. I'm not going anywhere. She gave him her number. He called back in 4 hours. All right, he said when she picked up. I'll let you come take a look. She sent a team the following day. Earl's water heater was replaced by noon. The pipes were assessed and 2 were repaired on the spot, and a 3rd was scheduled for the following week. Earl stood in his kitchen while they worked and didn't say much, but when the team lead told him the hot water would be fully restored by end of day, something in his face moved that was not happiness. Exactly, it was older and quieter than happiness. The expression of a man who has held something tightly for a long time and has just been told he can put it down. When Sienna called that evening to follow up, he said, You know what I did when I got hot water? What? She said. Took the longest shower I've had in 2 years, he said. Stood there until the tank ran out. Just stood there. She had to hold the phone away from her ear for a moment. When she brought it back, she said, Good, you should do it again tomorrow. He laughed. Earl Briggs had a laugh that belonged to a younger and larger version of himself, the full chest version, and it came out of him like something released, like it had been stored somewhere and needed the right key. I might, he said, I just might. She put the phone down and sat at her desk in the back room of the clubhouse, and she thought this is the key Hawk was talking about. This is what fit. It was 6 weeks after the Saturday of the motorcycles when the journalist called. She hadn't expected it, though. Darlene told her afterward that she had been watching for something like it since the morning of 450 bikes, because that kind of event didn't stay invisible no matter how carefully you tried to manage the aftermath. Someone had filmed it. Of course, someone had filmed it. 450 motorcycles on a residential street. Someone was always going to film it. The footage had circulated in a local Facebook group, then been picked up by a local news affiliate, and from there it had moved the way things move when they have enough emotional content to catch on a current in travel. The journalist was from a national outlet. She was professional and warm, and she had clearly done significant research before calling, which Sienna respected, even while she was deciding whether to talk to her at all. "I want to tell your story," the journalist said. "Not the biker story, not the motorcycle spectacle version. The real story. The woman, the $8, what it actually was." "Lily's legacy doesn't do publicity," Sienna said. "I know," the journalist said. "I've spoken with Mr. Hawkins. He's leaving the decision to you." Sienna held the phone. She thought about the wall of letters, the ones that said, "I don't know who you are, and I need you to know you saved us, and I still don't know how you knew." All those families writing into a void, giving their gratitude to an address that didn't have a face on it. She thought about Earl, about Angela Torres, about the 800 to 1,200 people in the elderly program pipeline who were still waiting. She thought about what visibility would mean. Not for Sienna Clarke specifically. She was not under any illusions about the complications of being a public face for anything, knew exactly what it would cost her in privacy and in the specific piece of being unknown. But for the work, for the families who were still invisible, for the next person who might need a Lily's legacy and didn't know one existed because Lily's legacy had been invisible by design. She called Hawk. "She's going to want to talk about the organization," Sienna said. "We can't go public the way we've been operating if the organization is public. We'll have to change some things." "I know," Hawk said. "Are you ready to change them?" A pause. "Are you asking me if I'm ready to let this become something bigger than I've been keeping it?" "Yes," she said. 11 years ago, Hawk said slowly, I sat on my bike at a rest stop and asked myself what Lily would want the rest of my life to look like. He paused. "I think she'd want this." "I think so too," Sienna said. "Then let's talk to the journalist," he said. The piece ran on a Thursday morning 6 weeks after the Monday Sienna had started her new job. She did not read it until after she'd gotten Maya to school and made her coffee and sat at the kitchen table in the yellow kitchen with the paper stars in the window, because she wanted to read it in the place where she lived her actual life. The journalist had done it right. That was the thing she felt reading it, not relief exactly because she had trusted something and the trust had been honored, but the specific settling that happens when you discover the world can sometimes do a thing the right way. It was not a biker story. It was not a spectacle. It was Sienna's story told from the specific angle of what a single decision by one person can set in motion: the aspirin, the 11 minutes, the $8, the wall of letters, the elderly program, Earl Briggs standing under a hot shower for the first time in 2 years. It mentioned Lily and Hawk and Darlene and the network that had been operating invisibly for 11 years. It mentioned Lily's house by name and gave the address of the Clement Street building that was, by the time the article ran, 6 weeks into its build-out and 8 days away from opening. It said near the end something that Sienna read 3 times. It said, "The most remarkable thing about Sienna Clarke is not what happened to her, the 450 motorcycles the job offered the community center. The most remarkable thing is what was already in her before any of it. She spent her last $8 on a dying man, not because she expected anything in return, not because she knew who he was, not because she could afford it. She did it because she couldn't walk past. In a world that teaches people to protect themselves by looking away, she hadn't learned that lesson yet. Or she had learned it and chose not to apply it. Either way, that refusal, the refusal to walk past a human being in need, is the whole of the story. Everything else is what happened because of it." She set the paper down. She sat at the table. She thought about the night at the gas station, which felt both very close and very far, the way things feel when they've become foundational, when they've moved from event to origin. She could still feel the concrete under her knees, the fluorescent light, the weight of the man's hand finding hers. She could still feel the $8 leaving her hand at the register. She had given it without calculating what would come back. You couldn't give $8 with the expectation that 450 motorcycles would arrive at your door. You couldn't give aspirin expecting a wall of letters and a job that fit like a key in a lock in a community center named for a girl who died at 17. You gave because someone was dying and you had what they needed. That was the whole of it. Everything else was what happened because of it. Her phone did not stop for 3 days. The article moved the way the journalist had said it might not in the viral spectacle way of things that burned bright and fast and left nothing behind, but in the slower, more sustained way of things that had something real in them. It traveled through the kind of networks that passed things with notes attached, read, "This, you need to see this, this made me call my mother." And each share carried a fragment of the feeling rather than just the content, so that when it reached people, it arrived with some of its weight intact. The calls were from journalists, yes, but they were also from people. A woman in Ohio who said her mother was exactly the kind of elderly person the program was trying to reach, and did they work in Ohio because she had been trying to figure out how to help her mother for 2 years. A man in Louisiana who had a building he'd been looking for a purpose for and wondered if Lily's legacy might be interested. A social worker in Chicago who said she had been quietly identifying cases for 2 years and had no network to send them to, and was this the network? Sienna answered every call. Darlene had to come to her on the second day and say with gentle precision, "You cannot answer every call yourself. That's not scalable and it's not sustainable, and I need you functional, not flattened." "I know," Sienna said. "Then delegate," Darlene said. "I'm working on it," Sienna said. "Work faster," Darlene said. She was learning delegation the way she'd learned everything else, by doing it imperfectly and correcting and doing it again. She brought in a woman named Patricia, who had found them through the article and who turned out to have been a customer service manager for 15 years and had the specific unflappable quality of someone who had answered difficult calls professionally for a decade and a half and still cared about the person on the other end of each one. Patricia handled the incoming calls. Sienna handled the ones that Patricia flagged as needing her specific kind of judgment. The Ohio mother was connected to a network contact in Cincinnati within the week. The Louisiana building was assessed remotely, and a conversation begun with the owner about how it might serve a Lily's legacy expansion. The Chicago social worker became the network's first formal referral partner outside the original 11 states, which meant the map on the wall of the back office had to be updated, which Darlene did with the contained satisfaction of a person who has been waiting for a reason to expand a map. On the 8th day after the article, Lily's house opened. She had wanted the opening to be quiet. Not because she was modest about it. She had stopped being purely modest about the work because the work was too important for her modesty to be the thing that protected it, but because she wanted the first people to come through the door to come as themselves, not as audience members to a moment. She wanted it to feel from the first day like what it was supposed to be, a place that existed for the people who needed it, not for the story of why it existed. Hawk disagreed, not on the principle. He agreed with the principle. He disagreed on one specific element. "Let the neighborhood come," he said. "Let the people who were on the street that Saturday come and see what it became. They're part of the story too. They deserve to see it." She thought about it and decided he was right. So the opening was quiet in the sense of no press, no cameras, no speeches, but it was not small. The neighborhood came. The Pattersons, Rhonda, Terrence, who brought his wife, who Sienna had somehow never met in 4 years of living across the alley from him, and who turned out to be a school teacher with a voice like a bell and a handshake like a declaration. Deb Kowalski came in her good cardigan and her good shoes and stood in the front room of the building and looked around at what it had become and said to Sienna quietly, "This is what you saw, isn't it? This is what you were moving toward." "I didn't know I was moving toward anything specific," Sienna said. "I was just moving." "That's how you get places," Deb said. "That's exactly how." Mrs. Delgado came with her walker and inspected the grab bars in the bathroom. First thing, she had specific opinions about grab bars, now earned expertise, and declared them adequate, which was high praise from Mrs. Delgado, and then settled into a chair in the main room and didn't leave for 3 hours, which was how Sienna discovered that what Mrs. Delgado had needed possibly for longer than the grab bars had been loose was somewhere to be. Earl came. He drove himself, which Sienna had not been sure he would do. He had mentioned his car, the way people mention things they're no longer fully confident of, And he parked carefully and came in with the formal ceremony of a man who had dressed for an occasion. And he stood in the main room and looked around and thus found Sienna and said, "I want to do something." "What?" she said. "Volunteer," he said. "I don't know what you need, but I've got time and I know how to fix things. 40 years in the steel mill, I know how to fix things." She looked at him. "We have a building full of things that need fixing," she said. "Then we're in business," Earl said. He was there 3 days a week for the next 4 months without missing it a single day. Cole was there for the opening too, and he found her near the end of the afternoon when most of the neighborhood guests had gone and she was standing in the front room of Lily's house for a moment alone, just standing in it, feeling its dimensions. "How does it feel?" he said. "Like it was always going to be here," she said. "Like we just had to get here." "Hawk's outside," Cole said. "He wants a word." She found Hawk on the front step the same way she'd found him on her steps that first Saturday, standing slightly to one side of the center of things and watching. He heard her come out and turned. "Good day," he said. "Good day," she said. They were quiet for a moment. "I want to show you something," he said. He reached into his vest pocket and brought out something small, a photograph old enough that the edges were worn, the color slightly faded in the way of photographs from before everything was digital and permanent. He held it out. She took it. A girl, 17 or so, maybe younger, with Hawk's dark eyes and a smile that was enormous and entirely unguarded, the smile of someone who didn't know yet that the world would eventually give them a reason to be more careful with it. She was in a hospital bed, but you almost didn't notice the hospital because the smile was filling up so much of the frame. "Lily," Sienna said. "Yeah," Hawk said. She looked at the photograph for a long time. "She looks like someone who would have done exactly what you described," Sienna said. "The fairness thing, showing up for the person the world wasn't showing up for." "She would have," Hawk said. "She did actually in the time she had. She used to drag food from the hospital cafeteria to families she saw who didn't have any. She'd disappear for 45 minutes and then come back with a tray, and she'd never say where she got it." His voice had that particular quality it got when he talked about Lily not broken, because he'd had 11 years to make it something than broken, but careful the way you're careful with something irreplaceable. "I think she stole it," he said. "I think she stole food from the hospital cafeteria and gave it to strangers and never told anyone because she didn't want to get caught and have to stop." Sienna looked at the photograph. "She would have loved this place," she said. "She would have run it better than either of us," Hawk said. She handed the photograph back. He looked at it for a moment before putting it away. "Sienna," he said. "Yeah." "Thank you for the name," he said. "It was always hers," Sienna said. He nodded once. He put the photograph back in his vest pocket, close to the left side, close to where his heart was. 3 months later, Sienna was sitting in the back office at Lily's Legacy, not the clubhouse back room anymore, but the actual office in Lily's house, which had its own desk and its own coffee maker, and a window that looked out over Clement Street, where she could see people coming in and out all day when Maya appeared in the doorway after school. This had become a thing. Maya came to the building after school twice a week. She did her homework at the small table in the front room, and sometimes talked to people who came in and sometimes helped Earl with small things, and had developed an opinion about the grab bars in the bathroom that was strongly influenced by Mrs. Delgado's expert assessment. Today, Maya dropped her backpack and came to stand in the office doorway and said, "Mom." Sienna said. "We got assigned a personal narrative essay for English," Maya said. "Okay. The prompt is, write about something that changed the way you see the world." Sienna looked up from her desk. Maya was looking at her with the look that had started when she was about 3 years old and had never changed, the one that saw too much, that sorted things by their real weight rather than their apparent one. "I think I know what I'm going to write." "Nah, not to write about," Maya said. Sienna held her gaze. "What are you going to write about?" she said. $8, Maya said. Sienna breathed. "You don't have to make it about me," she said. "It could be about the organization, about what it does." "It's about you," Maya said flatly, and with total certainty, the way 12-year-olds are certain when they've already decided something and are only nominally asking. "It's about what you did and why you did it and what happened. And I'm going to say that the most important thing I ever learned from you is that you can't change anything by walking past it." The office was quiet. Outside, Sienna could hear the front room, Earl's voice low and measured, explaining something to someone. the sound of the door, someone coming in. Okay, Sienna said. Okay, Maya said. Write it, Sienna said. Maya nodded once decisive and went back to the front room. And Sienna listened to her go and then turned back to her desk and the 3 cases open in front of her and the whiteboard with its color-coded map that now extended past the original 11 states and the list of referral partners, and the note from Darlene that said Ohio intake formally operational as of Monday, in the neat exact handwriting that said Darlene took even Post-its seriously. She looked at all of it. She thought about $8. She thought about aspirin and 11 minutes and a man on the ground who had been alone for a long time. She thought about cornflakes and $1.42 and a cracked phone screen and the yellow walls and the paper stars. She thought about walking into a gas station at midnight and almost not stopping. She thought about the 1 degree of turn that had been the difference between walking past and stopping, between the life she had been living and the one she was living now, between 800 to 1,200 invisible people and a network that was finding them one by one, and a building in their neighborhood called Lily's house, where you could walk through the door and be met by someone who understood what need looked like from the inside and was not going to make you document it or justify it or wait. She thought about Lily, 17 years old, stealing food from a hospital cafeteria for strangers and never telling anyone because she didn't want to have to stop. She thought about what Reverend Gaines had said, you already know what you're going to do. You're just working up to saying it. She thought about Rhonda in the window crying without self-consciousness. She thought about Earl's laugh coming out of him like something released. She thought about Maya at 12 years old writing an essay called $8 and knowing with the total certainty of a child who has spent her whole life watching exactly what it was about. She picked up the next case file. She got to work because that was what she did. That was what she had always done and what she would keep doing with or without $8 in her pocket, with or without anyone watching, with or without the knowledge of what it would set in motion. She stopped for people. She stayed. And that all of it, every thread of everything that had grown from that one midnight decision in a gas station parking lot, that was what happened when you did. The girl who had $8 became the woman who changed hundreds of lives. And she did it the only way any life ever truly changes anything. One choice made with clean hands in the dark when nobody was watching and there was everything to lose, and she stopped anyway. She always stopped. That was who she was. That was who she had always been. And nothing, not poverty, not exhaustion, not fear, not the weight of a life lived in the margins of what the world called enough, nothing had ever been able to change that about her. Nothing ever would.